Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah. But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go. Exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
And we should be on. Welcome, everyone. Hey. So, we are Dustin over there on the side, and Jeff over here, and we are the Wisdom Check. You may notice we don't have a guest tonight, and that's a rescheduling event that we'll be taking care of in the future. So you guys are stuck with us tonight, and we got some topics we want to kind of dig into. One of those definitely has to do with what Dustin's been up to with his prep for the end of his campaign that I'm playing in. And we kind of want to talk about just how to like wrap up and stick the landing, as it were, to the end of a good campaign. So I think that's one of the topics we're going to dive into.
Definitely where we're going to start out tonight. Who knows where we'll end, but that's where we're going to start, because that's how we usually roll around here on the Wisdom Check. So, again, I am Dustin. I am running a Zweihander campaign. It is the second of 3 Zweihander campaigns that I'm going to be running here on the channel. If you watched Terror and Treefell, you saw how that one came to an end. And this coming Sunday, I will be ending Horror in Huttenberg at 5 p.m. Central Time here on the channel. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I guess, maybe some of the details and mindset that I go through when ending a campaign. And thank you, Death Angel Shadow, for that. So, tier 1 sub.
Thank you.
And again, we'll talk about this in a more generic format. This is not a 2-hour discussion about my exact campaign. Jeff has ran campaigns, and he's ended them as well. Sometimes you end a campaign, sometimes your players end it for you. But
Yep.
we've seen both. We've seen it go both ways. So. But tonight we are going to talk a bit about that and talk a little bit probably about my campaign. But if you want to catch all the full details, because I can't spoil it, Jeff's sitting right here and he's one of my players. I can't ruin what happened.
An inside track?
No inside tracks tonight. But Wednesday night, 10 p.m., I will be here. And anyone who shows up there, not my players, hopefully, will get a complete full inside track on what's going to go down next Sunday. So that'll be your time for a sneak peek. But tonight we're going to talk about campaigns. So when you build a campaign, and I know this was something you were kind of toying around with because you were working on Pathfinder 1 yourself, how much of the ending did you have in mind when you started? Did you have an end in mind?
Well, I had a destination in mind.
That's a good way.
I had a scene where I wanted a certain set of events to kind of occur, not necessarily like planned out scene by scene, but like more of a concept of what I wanted to have the party hit at a certain point. You know, like a realization, a choice. The climax was kind of formed in my mind.
So did you have just an event? Is that what you're saying? Like the final battle will be this event, and how they get here doesn't matter, but this is the end. Like, is that kind of what you were shooting for?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a combat. But, knowing gamers is probably where it would go. So
it's hard to have a final resolution that doesn't involve a combat.
That's true. But so like more than likely it would have been. But the way I had it kind of thought in my head, it didn't necessarily have to be. But there was kind of an event and me, I'm kind of stuck on the philosophy of things. So I had a philosophical spearhead that came to a point there. And that's what I was hoping for anyway. And who knows? Who knows what comes out of the players? however many games down the way it turns out to be. Where, as in your case, you had it kind of planned out for the short arc, so you knew roughly how many episodes you were going for. It gives it a way easier time.
I feel like I'm unique in that aspect. I don't feel like a lot of people planning their campaigns do things the way I do. Not that what I do is better or worse. I just feel like my narrative style looks different than what I see out of most people who run TTRPGs. I consider myself, I've gone through this analogy before, but there are people like Levi when he's running 5e, like our Everstorm game. And when I watch the way his games are structured, I feel like I'm watching one of the CW like superhero shows like Arrow or Flash, right? Where it's always crew-based. It's usually short 3 to 4 episode arcs that tell a miniature story with a big overarching arc that they all kind of tie back to in little ways. So every 3 to 4 episodes, in this case with Everstorm, like we're jumping maybe island to island or city to city, something along those lines. In a normal campaign, that's maybe how it might go. Me, I don't do mine that way. I don't structure them that way. I consider mine to be more like watching the Netflix Marvel series, like Daredevil, Punisher. Like that's how I write my stories. They're 10 to 13 episodes in general. That's given some flexibility for players' plot that they're going to interject into my overall line of thinking and how I work around those. I give myself some flexibility. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you.
So I feel like those are how I tell my stories. They're maybe a little more direct. I don't consider them on rails by any stretch of the imagination. I think Horror and Huntenberg's a pretty good example of that. I no clue you guys are going with shit half the time. But I think that because it's such a shorter narrative than the 100 episode long campaigns that you see that go over stretch over 2 or 3 years, I think how I plan my endings is a little different than maybe how Levi be planning for Everstorm, how you might plan for Pathfinder, or how you see a lot of people out here planning for any homebrew campaign. So I think for me, I didn't put an ending to Horror and Huntenberg. I put like 7. It was literally like I literally refer to you guys as the Back to the Future ending.
I was going to say where we one of the 7. Yeah.
yeah. It was just kind of. Well, but the kind of the outcomes were somewhat based on which NPCs you guys gravitated to. So, the first couple episodes of Horror and Huntenberg, you guys are just meeting NPCs like all over the place, right? And you got this witch stone, right, which is the MacGuffin that drives the plot. It's just stuff, but you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. So, and that is exactly how I intended Horror and Huntenberg to be. And then I just started creating NPCs with different plans, and whichever plane you go towards is the plan that you get the outcome, determines the outcome. So it's like a make your own adventure sort of modular style plot that I'm working on. And then as you're advancing your plot, the other plots advance based on just what I like them to do. And then you interact with them at various points where you see them through their progression until they hit this final climax at the end. So that is where I feel like I do some things a little differently than what I think you see out of a lot of homebrew campaigns.
Yeah, I would say so. So I think a lot of people, there's a more open-ended kind of approach to, like you said, you have a kind of a plan of, X number of game sessions, give or take. Whereas I think a lot of people, it's just kind of like they feel it out. Like, when does it feel like the group is winding down? When have we hit certain milestones? Okay, now is about where I'm going to end it. And I think it gives a different time frame of when you have to figure out your ending, right? Like, do you plan it right at the start? Do you wait until you've kind of seen everything hash out? Do you have any idea of where it's going to end?
Sometimes don't.
I can imagine a lot of games are kind of set up to just be games that are occurring, and then all of a sudden it makes sense that this could be an ending here, and then you kind of build it up from whatever the pieces are in front of you. Detail out a section here, come up with some resolution to whether it's like the characters' plots themselves or just like a theme that's been running through the whole time. And, if you've got the moment, bam, that's when you should go.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. Like, you have to incorporate what your players are bringing to the story also, because it's their characters that are telling the story. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are telling most of the story. You're just, as a GM or DM, you're just creating that framework for them. And as I jokingly said last week when we had Daniel D. Fox here, like, it's not even a sandbox, it's a beach party. Like, the whole beach is yours to work with. Like, build sandcastles where you want, do the things you want to. Like, that's and so when you're that open with your game world and you're that open with your plot lines, like, you guys literally went back in time. Like, I mean, I gave you the option, but like, you guys picked it and you were like, no, we're going to make this thing happen. And you went through a lot of work to make it happen. So like, then I have to honor it, right? I have to continue to make it compelling and interesting. And I have to continue to try to find ways to tell your character's stories inside of that. Because while Horror and Huntenberg may have a certain narrative arc that you chose dealing with, were you able to resolve the feud between Alexi Arkwright and Hal Davidson, which ultimately you guys kind of did because of the issues because of what happened with Jeannie, you guys were able to bring those two together. Because this time travel plot, his difference engine and the Hal Davidson motorcycle were both needed to go back and fix Jeannie, which is kind of where you guys are at. Now, whether you succeed or not, we'll find out this week.
My money's on no.
You guys have done a good job of killing Jeannie twice. So I mean,
that's our MO. 3 times the charm.
The third time we'll see. But so like that was the narrative arc that you guys kind of went down. So as you dealt with those NPCs from their early kind of bitter rivalry, and you learned about their history, and you learned about the things that made them where they are, and their interactions with the Maester, like, you guys interact with these NPCs, and you guys also then start to develop a little bit of your own narrative of who you guys are as a group inside of that narrative. And so here at the end, I have to think, like, what can I do that's going to make Wolfram's journey meaningful? And what am I going to do to make Ravit's journey meaningful? Like, I've twisted your bodies, I've warped your minds, like, I've done all the fun stuff along the way, but like, when this next game session ends, I want the 5 players from Horror and Huntenberg at least to be like, yeah, this was worth it. Like, I need these characters to, to feel like they had an end.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, because you want to honor what makes those characters, and I think it's important to remember that the players' stories are usually at least as important as your story, if not more. Right. And you want everyone to feel like they got their just dues at the end of it, or at least, even if everything goes bad, you want it to feel like it's their bad. Like they got this moment because they earned it. And the stakes were high, and they got what they got out of it. And so, yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's interesting to see, just how things kind of tumble into position. Like, I'm thinking about, like we talked about Babylon 5 before on the stream. And for those of you guys who are in the audience who maybe haven't seen it, it's one of those series where it's clear that the story was written ahead of time. Like, they knew where it was going, what to foreshadow, how to present things. And when you started getting to the final seasons, everything started clicking into place. It was suddenly like, oh, wow, that scene that I thought had no relevance whatsoever, bam, there it is. Okay, there's payoff there. Oh, this event that's been coming together this whole time, it's back there. Okay, now I see how all this clicks together. This is satisfying. And that's really hard to pull off in a game, I think.
Do you feel like, I think it's hard to pull off in TV. Yeah. I mean, you look at how many TV shows, in my opinion, that went past their run, like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the end of Battlestar Galactica. Do you feel like that was really where the whole thing was going the whole time? Like, look at the end of Game of Thrones. Say what you want to. I feel like a lot of those were winged by the seat of their pants to come to a screeching halt at the end that a fair amount of each fan base was not particularly happy with. And again, so this is sometimes very anticlimactic. Exactly. So I think it's what you try to avoid as a DM or GM when you're writing. And I would question, and I see we got Joker with some questions in here too. We're going to get to some of his stuff here shortly. I would be curious though, the people in the chat who run games, because I hear this is a common thing, and I'll even admit I did it myself a little bit, and I'll share a little behind the scenes art with you here in a minute. You're going to see some of my art in a second. It's going to happen. But I was be curious how many people start by creating the big bad end guy. Because the moment you create the big bad end guy, because I see this a lot with people about creating the big bad end guy. If you do that first, then you are essentially setting all paths have to eventually lead back to this NPC. In the same way that your initial, if you think of, what was his name? Bart, whatever his name was, the dwarf that we had to like.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
You know, like in the same way, if you hinge your entire plot kicking off with one NPC who's your quote unquote buddy NPC, if your buddy NPC has to be that important that everyone has to like him, well, then your big bad end guy also has to be that important. Like you're falling into the same pit hole, in my opinion. You're not creating a bunch of, yeah, we agree about that. Yes, DLPK, we do. I just think that if you're hinging too much of your story, either at the beginning or end, on a single individual NPC, you're setting yourself up to fall into that same hole of if the players just don't like him, you're out of luck. If the players just don't hate him, you're out of luck. Like,
well, I feel like they're a little different, and it is an interesting topic. I will be curious to see what the chat has to say. But I think with the big bad guy, you know, you're not necessarily going to run into him right away. They do kind of set the tone of like the rest of the story, like where things are moving. And because we talked about like the big bad guy being kind of like the driving force of a lot of plot lines, I think that's important to have kind of early on, kind of establish where things are moving. But I think what's nice about the big bad guy is that if you need to adjust, you can. Whereas in the other situation where we were talking about Bort, the dwarf, it's like, hey, this game session 1, go. Well, I hope this works because I've got about 3 seconds to make this a thing.
Yeah, no. You're with your buddy NPC. You throw him in at the beginning. You very much have 5 seconds to. He's either going to stick or he doesn't, and then you're automatically on the fly adjusting if he doesn't. But I think that
Death Angel Shadow.
I think the trope of the big bad end guy is exactly that. I think it's a trope. And it was one of the things that I pushed for with Horror and Huttenberg when I started writing it, was that, and I did this with Terran Treefell as well, I didn't want to hone myself into a big bad end guy. So I created like 7. I created 7. I was like, these are the 7 biggest players in Huttenberg. Well, not biggest players, but these are the 7 main NPCs. And what I did was I kind of split them into groups and I kind of paired them up. I was like, here's these 4 or 5 who are doing exactly what they say they're doing. And then here's these 4 that seem like they're subordinates or underlings who have these other agendas that you can maybe discover, maybe not discover. And that those things all lead to different places. So who the big bad end guy is totally depends on who the players decide they want to latch to. You latch to some. If you guys had decided to work with Bravo von Helfrich, you very well could have had 2 or 3 other people in the campaign end up being more of the big bad end guy than the Maester. But you guys decided to, basically screw the Maester. You guys didn't like it. So
you did a good job of selling that one.
Well, he originally, and I said to my own fault when I started, he was the first of the big bad end guys I made. And when I first sat down to write, I did exactly what I'm saying not to do, is I made one, and I thought, well, who's this guy going to be? Why am I going to, what's he going to be like that's going to make everyone hate him? And so those things were already in place. Like, it was probably going to be hard to like him. But I did try to make it so that it's an option to work for him instead. And there would be bonuses and advantages to working for him. So and you guys then will roll a bunch of criminals. So at first I was like, they may just decide they like this guy. But no, that didn't happen either. But so like by the time it's all done, like you could easily be working with him and working against something else. And I think that's something that in my future games, I think I'm going to get away from a little bit, is starting with a big bad end guy and start working with the idea of a pool of NPCs and letting the players figure out which ones they do and don't like. And I learned that from my Terra and Treefell cast. I had created a throwaway NPC who, after about 2 to 3 sessions in, and that's Father Enoch, they decided he was like the worst dude on the planet. and he was shady, and thanks. I know we're talking today about how my camera looks better, Levi. We have no idea why.
Yeah, it's the
I
lighting.
put a new light in here, so I'm guessing the lighting is just better.
Just killing it.
Same camera. I never upgraded for those who are curious. But so I think that was with Father Enoch was a good lesson for me because he was supposed to just be a poser. He's just a fake priest. He has no real priest casting abilities.
Okay.
He's just a complete charlatan. That's his entire thing. So in Zweihander terms, he's a doomsayer. He lashes himself, and because of it, he talks about the end of times coming, and that's just who he is. But he's not an actual caster. He has no casting ability. So once the group realized he was a fake and that he's leading a congregation into being doomsayers instead of followers of the God Emperor, they decided he was like the head honcho behind it all. So I made him like a mini boss at that point. Like I decided, well, okay, I got to honor what the players have decided. And so I made him a mini boss. And what I realized is that went over so well. I was like, I need to quit designing my end bosses as end bosses and start just designing NPCs and seeing who they gravitate to and who they don't, and letting those factions decide where the narrative is going to go. So that's exactly what I did with Horror and Huntenberg.
I think there's a couple things going on here. So like, I think the reason why it's kind of fleshing out the way it is because you have an urban setting. You have or not necessarily urban, but you have a central setting where you have many directions to go, many people to interact with, and many outcomes from that. Whereas, your traditional dungeon crawl, it's I go to the big bad guy's house, I kick its door in, and I take his stuff. And so like I think that's kind of lending itself towards this structure just by its nature.
Agreed.
But then I also do agree. I think it's hard to manufacture something that will be as effective as what the players find, in terms of the big bad guy.
Right.
And like just like anything else in Dungeons and Dragons or any other tabletop game, you put out an NPC and you think, oh, this guy, they're gonna like this guy. This guy's a great guy, and then they hate him, they want to kill him, and you're like, what just happened? And then the character, like you said, that the throwaway character or just like the side character that you didn't have any plans to do anything with, end up being their favorite. And I do think you do have to kind of adapt your story to incorporate that, make that person more relevant.
Of course.
It's the same thing as like plot elements in general, like or puzzles and stuff. Like where your players find a solution that's more interesting than the one you already came up with. It's not the answer, but it is now.
It is now.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. It is. That was totally the answer, and I just wrote it down. And if I wrote this again, that's the answer. Like.
Yeah, but I think there's some, like, depending on how you're laying out your game, like what's important to you as the spine of your game. Is it a philosophical point? Is it a particular scene you're gunning for? Is it moral choices? Is it facing off against a particular style of person? Those are going to create different end games. Time to do a little moderation there.
Yeah, a little moderation time.
These things are just going crazy lately.
That's all right. We appreciate your view and your chat.
I don't know that I can moderate that right now.
Let me see if I can. I'm on TT2KB. Go ahead and keep
Nice.
talking, Jeff. I'll see if I can do some work here real quick.
You spam bots.
Spam.
It throws us right off. Yeah, we get a lot of these lately. I don't know what the deal is, but they come in and they drop those links, and they're probably not dangerous, but if they are, I don't want anyone accidentally clicking it. And for whatever reason, I'm just not being able to moderate. But anyway,
that doesn't either. Oh well. Don't click that link. It's not from us.
I think it's really important, like I said, to adapt to your players for one. But I also think that depending on how you have it laid out, what your spine is, where I was kind of getting at, that's going to kind of dictate how much flexibility you have on that front. Like if you're keyed into it's got to be this guy, then you don't have the flexibility to do that. If it's a concept, then I think you can put the concept onto whatever it happens to be interesting to the players. So I think you can always rewrite, I guess is what I'm saying, before the content is fully divulged.
If you got a serious central spine, then yeah, you're right. Players, and this is typically how I write my games. I usually do have a pretty heavy central spine, as we've discussed in the past. Like it's usually where I start, and then I let players decide what the rest of the skeleton around that spine looks like. I think Horn Huntberg might be the first time where I didn't go that hard into a central spine, where I was able to literally just be like, it's an invertebrate. You get to decide all of it. Like, you know, if you pick the kind of spine you want to have for your done, and you guys get to determine what that spine looks like. So, you know, I think that if you're doing something like a module is such a heavy spine, you can't deviate from it at all. It's truly on rails. So for me, I try to create a story that is a sandbox, usually is what I shoot for. And that is why I typically do urban settings. Even in my D&D campaigns are typically a lot of times still urban. Is because the walls of a city then become the walls of my sandbox. Everything inside is yours to play with. And I usually have good ways of trying to keep you there so that you don't just like go wandering off unless I want you to. Now you guys are wandering off this last episode, and you're wandering into a place I need you to kind of be where you guys wanted to be also. So, you know, it's not like it's impossible to, but it does, you know, I named it Horn Huttenberg. Like, you got to clearly kind of stay in Huttenberg somewhat. Oh, hey, Ian Flux, thank you for the raid.
Thank you.
So, you know, I do have to kind of keep you over there in some way, shape, or form. But I think when you're doing modules and stuff, that the spine gets too heavy. You don't have any flexibility in it, so you're not ending your campaign as much when you're doing a module. Whereas when you're homebrewing, you have complete control, and it minus, you know, the control that you give to your players. So
yeah, I'm curious about that because obviously our group doesn't do a lot with modules, so we're not accustomed to seeing how their climax scenes, you know, their big bad guy or whatever is laid out and what it feels like to get to those points. Whereas I think maybe some people in our chat are more familiar with that. You know, like for us, we're just used to, you know, being able to homebrew our way, you know, to something exciting and interesting. Like that's just kind of default to us.
And I think that sometimes people don't want to have to put that sort of effort in. That's why they gravitate to a module, because it's done for them. Like all that time and energy is done for them. All they have to do is just focus on the players and how they get the players involved in the module so that the players make that module story part of their own story. And basically the players then, they adapt the written narrative as part of their narrative so that their spine and the spine of the module become the same story. Whereas I feel like what I've done with Horn Huttenberg is I've taken away that spine and put all the onus on you guys as a group of players to figure out who you want to be.
Right.
And then let my NPCs react and grow and adjust along with you as you push towards the culmination of what you wanted to be. And which is a little different philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I'm thinking back. I may be the worst person to be talking about how to end a campaign. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually ended one or if they all just ended by time or us people moving apart or getting married or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I said. Sometimes the players end it for you, and you never actually get there. But do you have think back to like your Dark Ages game? Did you have an ending in mind for it, or was it going to a soap opera? Like you think of something like a daytime soap operas, like As the World Turns has been on for like 50 years. There's no end to that thing inside. It could go on for another 50, and the same plot lines will still be running somehow. So
this is one that he's talking about. I ran a Dark Ages vampire game back in high school. And to say that I had anything planned is incorrect because we played it like every single day, sometimes multiple times in the same day for like 5 or 6 hours at a go. And I had stuff planned initially. And then I just got steamrolled by just the amount of sessions we had. And that game was really interesting because it all turned out to be player driven. Like the players, all their characters had agendas and goals, and somehow one of the players opted to be a nemesis, like a big bad guy. He had his like own agenda that was running just contradictory to everyone else. He went against some NPCs that the other party members really liked, and because it was vampire, it was okay to do some PvP stuff, and it just worked. And that one, I guess that one did kind of culminate in a, big scene, where the players confronted each other and got resolved, dealing with all the NPCs. And I feel like everyone was pretty happy with it, but that was organic. Like I had a hand in kind of shepherding it back into a certain shape, but the material was already there. Like that was all in the players, and I don't know. It's an interesting thing because
It sounds a lot.
Maybe the best one I had.
That plot design sounds a lot like how we would design our LARP plots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
I know for LARP, like I had several plot arcs that I would run, and when I would create an in for those, they very much also started with a group or a big bad in guy sort of scenario as well, right? Because a lot of times your LARP plots were monster of the week sort of shit.
Oh, like for sure.
It was, the players are the main course. You're creating an extra plot here or there that if nothing else creates a crisis that the people in charge have to handle, or otherwise the rest of the community gets mad at them and then tries to dethrone them, which brings the player versus player aspect back in. And that's really what churns the pot at a LARP like that when you have 50 players. So you're creating side plots that are just nothing more than a distraction and an opportunity for the people in charge to screw up. So that things will change every now and then. Praxis season will happen. They'll throw the prince out, because they didn't handle something that happened in some guy's side scene, like it was just something like that. So I feel like those were based a little different. It sounds like your vampire game was based very much off of that, even though you hadn't done LARP. It might have been a primer for LARP for you.
Yeah, a lot of it was, okay, here are the players. Here's something that will be motivating to a certain group of them as like a potential benefit that they can get. And then not dealing with it will have a certain type of consequence that may not be directly against them, but could be a problem. And so like there were like ways to interact that. They could ignore it and then there would be an outcome. They could get it successfully and they get something good, or they can ignore it and have something bad happen to them or to their enemies. And so there was a lot of like kind of looking at what the plot was, figuring out where they were in relationship to it, and then to figure out where the other NPCs and other players were in regards to that plot and see how they would benefit or lose. And there was like game theory was going on. And I thought that was really fascinating. So like I just like kind of dropping those elements around and then seeing where they went. And then if they bid on something, I fleshed it out a little bit more, developed it up, and just kept prodding player interaction and personality stuff. And because of that, I think I found out what made those characters tick, and I think the players figured out what made those characters tick, and that led to a satisfying end. And not necessarily the story I wrote, but just that they knew exactly what their characters were and what they were trying to accomplish. And so when they got to the point, they knew they were there.
Now, I was not heavily involved in that game myself. So would you consider there to have been winners and losers in that game?
Yes. One player definitely lost. He was playing the big bad guy. I think he realized he was going to lose, but he almost won. And it was a very, fever pitch scene that really came together. And I think that he was satisfied with his, ending and, didn't take it poorly or anything like that.
Particularly if you realize you're pitted against all the other players, at some point you're going to go down. It's just a matter of whether or not the way it happens is satisfying to you.
Yeah, and it was epic. It was a very big scene with all the important players were there. They had a role. There was a dynamic at play for each of them. There was a person to save. There was a person that was irredeemable. There was the social ramifications of the scene were there. Like, they try to do dialogue, they try to get to a point, and they just hit the side.
Says it was
like, it can't be done.
When your players just chiming in, say he remembers it as stressful.
Yep. It was good. I liked it a lot. I think everyone had fun. Maybe Crazy Ike didn't have fun. I don't know. But I thought it was a good time. And I liked the way that one played out.
That's good. I mean, I think that in a situation like that where there's any PvP involved, there probably is going to be a little stress at the table. And unless you know the I was going to say, unless you know that the person playing the big bad end guy is just going to blow it off as completely fun and cool. Like, I can see where it might be. It'd be rough. Like,
I feel like he knew what was on at play there, because there were other scenes where he won the scenes, and he got a lot of victories early throughout the series of the game. So he had his wins, and then when it came time, his comeuppance happened, and it was deserved.
Right.
So
now, I think another aspect of of ending a campaign, I
Mhm.
think there's a couple of things that you have to take into mind. Like, I think one, there's going to be some sort of conflict. It doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
combat, like we said
Mhm.
earlier. It often
Right.
is. But there has to be some sort of challenge that is the climax of the story.
Mhm.
That this is all boiled down to. And it's got to be something that we have now said is fulfilling to the characters. It's
Mhm.
got to be something that's fulfilling to the story arcs that are involved, and kind of ties everything into a bow with as few loose ends as possible.
Yeah.
So I think the other element that we haven't talked about with it is, how do you set up that challenge? Because, I mean, we could talk about things like CRs and challenge ratings and what's an appropriate challenge rating. And that's not really what I want to get out of this, but more of a, how do you set it up so that the players feel like they have a chance, but victory is not guaranteed? Because the biggest problem I have sometimes near the end of campaigns is that there's no choice but the players need to win. There's not and if they don't, then players start saying, like, well, crap, like, did we have a chance? Like, is there anything we could have done to actually win this? And I actually got that from my Terror and Treefail group a bit, because they were like, is there a way for us to actually win this encounter? And I was like, yeah, just don't critically fail 11 times and you would have won. Like, you could have defeated the plot, but the plot defeated you because Zweihander has a very high level risk of failure in anything you try to do. Peril takes away your skill ranks, so your base stats are anywhere from like 30 to 50% chance to succeed. If you have a skill rank, you might push yourself to 45 to 55 might be a good average if you have a skill rank in something. Well, peril takes that skill rank away. You're right back down to the 40 percentiles, roughly. So your odds of failing on any given roll is higher than succeeding. So it's not complete with factor all the time, but it's also like, you have to kind of plan that maybe the characters don't succeed. And that's something I think in planning a game, when you're playing like D&D 5e, your odds of success on anything you do by the time you're at the end of a campaign is so astronomically high that it's probably hard to create a scenario where the characters probably don't end up winning.
Yeah.
Like, I think it would be rough to write otherwise for 5e.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I guess it depends on your philosophy, right? So, like, if your goal is to make sure that the players win, because you're going with the DM philosophy of, like, I'm here to throw a challenge out there that they overcome.
Sure.
Then you have one style of response to that. If you have the attitude of you're not going to necessarily win, it's just the story happens, then you're going to have a completely different take on how that fight comes together. And then
Correct.
if you I think that's an important thing to figure out about what you're wanting to achieve. And I think it's really important to understand how that's going to feel to the players. Like, do you want it to feel like you're an impartial just arbiter? Or do you want it to feel like I am kind of there with you? Or do you want to feel like I am against you? And like,
right.
Those
I
all have
wasn't
a
so much
different feel.
thinking of it as against the players, but just more of an arbiter. Like, this is the scenario I've set up, and this is the challenge, and this is what's been created. So then, like, I guess there's a difference between 10 episodes of Terror and Treefell, where at the end of 10 episodes with randomly generated characters at the beginning, like, whatever. But those players got attached to those characters. You can see Lee when he comes back to play Everest, like, it's his favorite character.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He paid money to have art made for it. Like, he ran away to ensure that he lived at the end of that game session. So, like, to say that there is an attachment to the characters would be untrue. But at the same time, then, like, they were put in a really difficult situation of their own design.
Well, that's the important part of that sentence, of their own design.
Right. So
I think if you get into a bad situation because of your actions, that feels okay to lose. Whereas if, your game master stacks a deck against you and you just get pwned into the ground, that doesn't feel good.
Right. So I guess it'd be different than if I feel like at the end of 100 episodes of Everstorm, right? Assuming that Bowron doesn't die, which I don't have any plans on him dying, so I feel like I'm doing all right. But if you get to the end and find yourself in that scenario, is there a difference when it comes to longevity of a campaign? Like, do you think it makes a difference whether it's a short run like my stories or a longer run to have that sort of ending come about?
I think there is a different feeling because I think with the short run, it's short and because of that, like anything could happen, right? You don't feel like there's a weight of I should win, right? Whereas with a 100-game arc, if you did something that long, you've been going and going and going. You've been surviving. You've been overcoming. You've been winning. You've been fighting your way through. You finally get to the point where you're at the end, and the end should be the climax of us winning. Oh, it wasn't. Fuck.
But if you get there and it feels too cakewalkish, does it seem anticlimactic to you then? Because, I mean,
Yes,
you get there
very
and you
much.
just steamroll the end guy. Like,
Mhm.
okay, well, that was cool, but, we've been building up for a year, 2 years, however long your campaign's been going, and we get there and boom. Because we're super powerful, we steamroll it. Like, is there any...
Well, it's about
does
choices.
it feel like a climax?
I do. I think that if you end up in a situation where the players can just walk over it, it doesn't feel right. It becomes like the Final Fantasy VII ending where you just hit the Knights of the Round quad, mimicked, and then you walk away from your TV and you see what happens in about 3 hours.
There's a good reason I play those games straight through as quick as I can. I don't do the side quest. And then I go back and I do the side quest later for that exact reason. Because I want it to feel epic at the end. So
yeah. And I think, if you know what your characters can do, what your players are capable of, I think you can adjust and make an interesting scene. I might pull in an example of not an ending, but the ending to an arc that one of our players, Tim, just did in his game that I play in. And we ended up in the Shadowfell thing. We were at this weird bridge, and he made a really interesting encounter with a Bodak, which is a type of undead. And there was this huge long bridge, and the mechanic that he put in play was like there were X number of skeletons would get spawned potentially each round. The bridge had like all these ropes that would grab people and potentially trap you there. And then this guy was at the end of this altar, like siphoning life out of this person we wanted to save. And so we had to rush over there and get to it. And he had abilities that were just devastating, like an aura of death, and like he could look at you and just drop you to 0 hit points and a bunch of crazy shit. And it was like right at that edge of like, if you didn't do X, Y, Z in the right order, you were fucked. And like there were a couple parts in that fight I was like, I think this is a TPK. Not because we're all at low hit points, just like we're just positioned really poorly right now. And the multiple elements at play there. So like having to deal with the environment, having to deal with a timer that we weren't sure of how long it was, or whether it was a timer or not, but we thought it was. And then also dealing with just the pure combat element of it. I think all of those came together to make a really interesting scene that when we finished, we were just like, God, we made it, and then we found out more information about who that was and why they were relevant and all that kind of stuff through some other later investigation. So it kind of like all tied back together. And so that was a really well put together scene. And I think that's what you could do with these end events is to, come at the players from different angles with different style of complexity and, challenge that isn't just numbers. I think the numbers are important, right?
I think what I didn't hear you say, I don't think, but is the one thing I'd shoot for. And those other elements you put in there are awesome. If you can make those other things happen, they're fantastic. Mm-hmm. Time-sensitive stuff, any tactics you can add to the encounter, things like that. Like those are very much elements that I shoot for in my battle maps and things as well. I should, me, one of my biggest go-to complaints is always the meteor in Final Fantasy VII, right? It just hangs up there till you decide that you want to go deal with it. You can go race chocobos, do whatever else, right? Like narrative-wise, horrible. But so you have to have something that seems like there's more time sensitive to it. Like you have those things in there, that's great. What I shoot for, and what I'm hoping to pull off again this week in Horton Hutberg, is the moral complications.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I didn't hear you say in that encounter. I'm not saying they weren't there. I'm just saying you didn't mention it. That's what I shoot for. Most of my games are based around, and I think now you've completed at least one of my campaigns, two probably at least, is that my NPCs are typically all kind of morally gray. So you don't like any of them fully. You don't hate any of them fully. And it's just a matter of when you get to the end of the story, what moral choices then do you as a character then have to make? Are you going to join them as morally gray individuals? Are you capable of overcoming being morally gray to do the hero thing, even if it kills you? Or do you burn in a blaze of glory regardless of which moral choice you ended up making? Like, those are all kind of options at play. And so for me, that's what I try to focus on when I'm ending my campaign is how do I make this decision, whether they, as they say, defining win, lose, draw, whatever. To me, it's based around the moral choice they have to make near the end of the story. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to pull to the end in Horror in Huttenberg this coming Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how your campaign's laid out. Like, if it's just the hero's journey, I think that's a more black and white kind of concept. It's clearly there's the villain. I'm going to defeat them, save the day. Whereas I think with what you're laying out is, of course, a more nuanced thing where it's, where do I fit in? What type of person am I? What does this scene reveal about me? And I think they're just different styles of a game. And I think they are, both valid, but I think there's more complexity in the second one. And some of that I think is in a more traditional kind of layout, I think is done prior to the scene. It's just like along the way, you've made these little decisions here and there that have kind of said, okay, these are the moral choices I'm making. They're just not as tricky, I guess.
I guess what I'm getting towards, and what my advice to DMs or GMs out there would be, is whatever you have featured as the real sticking point of your game. If you are an X's and O's tactical game, your end needs to be a master's thesis on tactics and movement, and have that payoff for people who've learned the little missteps along the way, so that when you get there, everything you have at your disposal that you've learned is used in that final encounter. If you're like me and you're running a game that's based around a certain amount of morality and a certain amount of questions of metaphysics and things like that, those metaphysics and all that have to be present at the end.
Yep, agreed.
I think maybe those are the through lines that I'm getting at. Like, if you're telling a love story and it's a diceless system, that's fine. Like, but it's that through line has to be there at the end. It's got to punch and it's got to land, and that's what you have to end that campaign.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a good lesson to take from Breaking Bad. I think was a good example of how they did that correctly.
Yes.
Like from the beginning to the end, it was about change and how these characters progressed and like what little things led them to be these new people they are at the end. And it was about the relationships between, Walt and Jesse. It was the choices they make, the ramifications of that up until the very end, that stress dynamic, that love and hate, that father-son kind of dynamic. And of course, you had that desperation due to pride kind of component. And that's all there right to the very end. And it, that was a satisfying end. So to your point, I think that's exactly right. I think you have to give a full serving of whatever your campaign has been up to that point.
Now, this is another element to ending a campaign that I don't think you've ever dealt with, but I certainly have, and certainly am right now, is that my campaign world is not a single campaign. I have linked together 3 campaigns, and I still have one more to go. And I already have a very bare bones idea of what that 3rd campaign is. I put together some splash art for it. I have very much an idea in mind and who some of the NPCs are in mind. But what I don't know at this point is how Horror in Huttenberg will exactly end in this iteration of it. Same thing with Terra and Treefell. I knew I was going to do Horror in Huttenberg next, but I wasn't sure how Terra and Treefell would end that would lead into Horror in Huttenberg. So is there a difference writing an ending when you're writing in a persistent campaign world versus if Terra and Treefell just sits on its own and isn't connected to anything else? I have free liberty to do what I want with it. It can end however it wants to. But if I'm planning another campaign after that, or if you're just planning a particular plot arc within your own campaign, like Tim's recent one you said he wrapped up was a miniature arc inside, he still has to make sure that ties to something going on forward. So how different is that for you? How much does that change for you, you think, if you were going to do something along those lines?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on when you're doing your planning, right? So, like, if you have an intention of creating a 3-part series, you know that you can't end with the world falling apart. You know, there has to be something left over. So you don't write a plot in the second act that destroys the world, right? So, like, I feel like...
I mean, but did I, Jeff? I'm just saying.
You did, I know, but I'm saying you may have painted yourself into a corner potentially, or we'll see. But I think that's your intention. I don't know. For me, I think it's just a matter of wait to see how the second one ends, and then, you know, pick up the pieces and go, okay, where do we go from here with the parts that I have? Now, if you've already got something, it sounds like you don't, but if you had something already prepared that you're aligning the stars and like, this is how it's going to go from point A to point B, I think you're going to fail at that because players will find a way, you know, to destroy whatever carefully made plans that you have.
Sure.
So that is a challenge. I think with our typical games, we kind of get around it by doing a time hop. You know, so like every campaign has its kind of climactic, big world-changing event, but then they're separated by time, and then we can go to another place.
I think scope is the word you're looking for, because if you take like Levi's game, we're 5 campaigns into Levi's Limb World, and Everstorm being the 5th campaign. I felt like campaign 4, which ended with the Baron, I felt like it was like world climactic, like saving the world bullshit. Turns out we were just saving one country. Like, it's like when you think about it, like after Levi finally scopes back and shows you how much bigger his world really is than what the original maps, because all we were given were those early maps. So that was like our whole world. So like it seemed like the whole world was at stake. But the truth is, it was like throwing out a dictator of like some Middle Eastern country or something, right? Like that was basically what we were doing. Like was removing this one really bad dictator of sorts. So it affected a few different regions. It seemed world spanning though. Like, wow, like it can't get any bigger than the Baron. And then Everstorm starts. And you're like, wow, like I didn't realize just how small of a fish the Baron was. Like until you start getting out in the rest of the world and you start seeing the rest of the players out there, and you're like, these guys don't even know the Baron. Like he ain't even on their radar hardly. Like so it's scope has a lot to do with it, I think.
Yeah, and I think that goes to show that if you attach your plot to your players and motivate them sufficiently, it will feel epic. You know, and, you know, any politics are local, you know, at the end of the day. Any conflict is local at the end of the day. At least the ones that are important to the actors at play. So, yeah, I mean, you can make a scene that just happens in a town feel like it's epic and huge and world-changing. And, yeah, it just depends on how you framed it to that point. If you've shown just the super hyper-zoomed-in scope, then, yeah, it's going to have a much bigger impact than if you've pulled way the fuck back, shown all these pieces, like you said, and had this little event over here and, you know, given away the fact that this is just a small nugget. And so, yeah.
I did the same thing at Terran Treefell. The chapter 10 of Terran Treefell is literally called World on Fire. But once you pan back from Huttenberg, you realize that it was really just that forest that got set on fire. It was the California wildfire, you know, of fires. Like, if you live in California, the whole world's on fire. But if you live in Illinois, like, the fire was over there. And you know, it wasn't nearly the same, right? Like, so yeah, I think that ability to pan back and expose then more of your campaign world allows you, as you said, if you keep the focus narrow and in a place, even a place as small as like Treefell was, like you can make it seem like everything is ending because that's where everything has been.
So long as there are stakes. So like if you're players and you're just in a place that you don't care about, with people you don't care about, without any motivations, and then something's bad's going to happen, doesn't have any impact at all, right? But
Right.
if you've done the campaign justice, you've done it correctly, those things should be in play, and then that end will naturally feel very important to them. Now we got a wisdom check redemption here. So Joker,
From Joker,
says,
our buddy Joker.
so he's been running Cyberpunk, and here's an interesting end campaign question. How you deal with games that have to do with very mundane stuff. How do you end a game like Cyberpunk, where the players are members of a rock band? Do you go apocalyptic scenario against Corp, or is more fulfilling to end like Bohemian Rhapsody type of ending? Well,
I
again,
like to go for the Wild Stallions ending, where they're on stage singing "God Gave Rock and Roll to You" and to the end credits. That's where I want to go. Is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Yeah.
Scene.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If your game has been servings of a certain type, then the end should be of that type. And so if you're playing a mundane game about music and whatever is going on in relationship, like, did they have like a bunch of like battle of the bands? Did they have like trying to get signed in a record company? Did they have legal trouble they were trying to get through? Like whatever the theme was that was kind of going through there, I think you got to just serve up a double dish of that. Dial that up,
absolutely.
find some way of adding a few little things to it. But that needs to be the style. Like, I would not go world-ending kind of event unless the rest of the story felt like it involved that.
No, I agree. I don't know what your Cyberpunk game has looked like.
I don't either. That sounds crazy.
I won't lie though. You got me intrigued because I have long coveted the idea of a D&D game based around 5 bards. Or I would be willing to divvy up the classes a bit if you wanted to say there was a dual-wield fighter who was the drummer, but used a couple of clubs to beat the drums. He was ambidextrous, dual-wield. Like I totally have always thought of this idea of a rock band, like a band, like a D&D campaign that was a band that was literally just on tour. So the only reason you traveled from city to city in this campaign world is because you were on tour.
Mm-hmm.
So I've often thought about, like, if I ever played a bard, like that would be the game I would want, like something fun like that. Like just to take a D&D campaign and just put it on its head. Like you're hiding behind your mic. I don't know if you're doing that, Jeff, but you maybe not.
No, I have 2 cameras now, so I may be.
Okay, so you're only hiding behind your mic to me.
I'm just making sure you can't see my face. There we go. How's that? That's
perfectly
aligned.
Microphone is what I'm doing here. So
sorry, I was like, I'm going to get a
I hadn't
different spot.
looked at the other screen long enough to realize it wasn't the same screen I'm seeing on here. So that's some movie magic going on here for Jeff.
Yeah. So Joker's saying here, Dustin, I'm running a sandbox game. I got a reporter going underground trying to tell the truth. A fixer slowly becoming a kingpin. And a rocker girl going through the CBGBs type of scenario. Well, so it does sound like you have, with that reporter kind of angle, somebody getting the underground truth out there. Usually that's, going against the man of some type. So there is kind of that big element there at play. Becoming a kingpin, obviously it means you're taking over, you're getting involved with give and take of stuff, dealing with, powers that are at play. So I don't know, maybe it's like a Shinra kind of thing, since we keep dipping back into the Final Fantasy VII element.
For something like this, and this is something, and Jeff, you know this, so this is not a spoiler, but I think that you're in a good position there, Joker, to do what I like to refer to as the Rorschach ending. And Jeff's character Wolfram is very much the Rorschach of my game. I think most of the players in Horton Huttenberg realize that they're not meant to walk away from this last encounter in one piece. Now, I've got some plot twists for them on how this is going to go down, so they don't know how it's going to go down. But one of the things that Wolfram, Jeff's character, is doing, he's been writing this manifesto about what criminal life is and this, that, the other. And then that manifesto became something maybe a little different here at the end, where he started writing other stuff in there, plans for the future, things he needed to make sure got into people's hands. Like it became this like manifest of like the truth needs to be known, which is why I call it the Rorschach ending. And then that is going to survive long after he does. And you could do that because you're talking about something that's like at the grassroots of the origin of something, in this case, punk rock, where this band of people who create punk rock, they could have some horrific the day the music died like ending. Like and that their music and everything could then go on to create like a whole thing like that goes on to like become punk rock and like everything else. So like, you know, you have an opportunity maybe even to pull in something really cool like that at the end where if you're going to have them go down in some epic, you know, blaze of glory, like that their art then lives on beyond them. So that with something like an artist, you have that, oh, Lindy's raiding with 7. Lindy,
Hey.
welcome to the show. We're talking about how to end campaigns because, you know, we're going to be doing that this week.
Mm-hmm.
So we were just discussing what I like to refer to as the Rorschach ending, where because of a piece of art or something that a character works on or a group, that it can live on even if that group dies a horrible death. Not foreshadowing anything, Lindy, at all, I promise.
Oh, no.
But it's possible that the things your characters do could live on long beyond your character's actual life. So,
Laugh Love Lindy just said, woohoo, we just ended our Dread mini campaign. So
I watched some of that campaign before we went live tonight. It was very good.
nice.
Nuggetosaurus was running it. Cool.
Yeah, so, I guess why that works is that whether you win or lose, you still had a hand, like you had a plan that still unfolds. Like you have a resolution that occurs. And in that is the potential hope of a victory of some sort. You know, even if it's left kind of hanging out there, it's just like that little thread that you can kind of grab to.
Right. And what I found out through Terra and Treefell and through the end here of Horn Huttenberg, at least I hope, is that when you have a persistent campaign world where there's future campaigns, even if those players are not directly involved in them, the legacy of their characters carrying on or having some impact on the world makes their demise okay.
Yes.
My players from Terra and Treefell are getting a second chance at that this week, thanks to you guys. They were totally all cool with the way it went down the first time. Like they were all real happy with it. But they're all just as thrilled now as I've been talking to them to get a second chance to come back and make this shit right. They could fall on their face and completely fail again. So, you know, it's completely possible. But it is a scenario, I think, where if you have a persistent campaign world, you have that luxury of doing the legacy, I guess, the legacy ending. For the party, or for even an individual in that party can have a legacy ending, and it will still be fulfilling because it's not the end. It's different than getting just a pure epilogue.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, it's just like life. You want it to have a meaning, right? So, like, your characters want the same thing, and not everyone ends up, in the grave eventually. So, like, really, it's what have you changed that persists past you is what you're kind of getting at here. And I think that is a valid way to end. Like, I think that's why that hero's death, like to sacrifice myself to save the, friend or like the king or whatever. That's a trope that works really well because that memory is carried on. The creation of a group or an identity that carries on, like in the Rorschach kind of way, or like the Joker, I guess, in an anti-hero kind of way. Anything that like leaves that lasting thumbprint in the clay is going to be something that people feel good about, whether they win or lose.
They left the mark.
And I think that is right. If you have that persistent campaign, you have a lot of opportunities to do that. And I think it's important that if you do carry on, that those players learn of those things because it makes those scenes even more important.
And that's what I did with Horn Huttenberg. Now, you guys were new sets of players. You guys did not take part in Terra and Treefell. You may have had the most knowledge because you edited the videos and put them on YouTube. So you actually saw more of it than probably most of the other players. I know Defenders of Cobalt Chuck was there for a little bit of them because when you watch those episodes on YouTube, you hear me reference him in the chat. So he was there for at least some of it. But all those things that took place at the end of Terra and Treefell had complete Easter eggs and payoff in Horn Huttenberg. Some you guys recognized, some you didn't. Now that you're at the end of it and you're reliving some of the events of Terra and Treefell because you went back in time, some of those things you saw at the beginning of the game are suddenly making way more sense. They will after this episode anyway. Some of them you haven't seen yet, but they will by the end of this coming episode. You'll see things you'll be like, oh, that was who that was. Like in the last episode, I could talk about it. You guys saw Max Keller, the guard, who Lindy and Greta had encountered and got info from at the beginning of Horn Huttenberg. He was a guard. He was a guard that was there at the beginning of Treefell, the day everything went south. So,
Okay.
him showing back up is just tying that connective tissue back to the origin. Then you guys travel back in time and you see that initial scene starting to take place all over again.
Mhm.
And something that even the character player of Zelina Shoshi doesn't know, or didn't, unless she's watched the videos, I don't know if she has or not, was that her character had a love interest that she doesn't even know about. But it was an NPC you guys dealt with for the entirety of Horan Huttenberg, and then learned that he was her love interest along the way, and that he was trying to find a way to bring her back. And that was part of what he was doing there. And you guys figure that out through the cult.
Yep,
and then you burn them all down. So
that's what we do.
We just burned
in
it to the
plot
ground,
right
right?
there.
So and that's where that plot ended. So, or at least where you think it's ended. But then you guys get to that scene where you see him walking with her as she gets ready to enter the marketplace, which is where the player of Shoshi then actually took over of the character back in Treefell the first time, was her just in the market. So like you get a little almost like prequel action there that kind of ties it all back together. And so now when you guys get to the end and you get to see the end of Terran Treefell replay through the lens of Horan Huttenberg now because of your guys' actions, some of those things are going to have more meaning both for you guys and for them both. I think if they were to, the Terran Treefell cast, if they were to watch Horan Huttenberg, would see all the Easter eggs and it would have a lot of meaning for them. And
absolutely.
You guys getting to go back now will get to have some of those things like the Plague Doctor who is going to be buried. You're going to meet that Plague Doctor next game. The Plague Doctor who they said it was, you've already met him. He was an NPC that you guys dealt with several times before you realized who he was.
That damn cultist.
Yeah, damn cultist leader. But so I think there's a lot of those through lines that because I'm running a persistent campaign, even though I'm using different parties inside of it, I still have to honor that legacy from one game to the next. And so everything from Terran Treefell to Horan Huttenberg and what I'm doing here at the end of Horan Huttenberg will then launch and have those same Easter eggs and tie-ins to Vigilantes of Valandria when we get there at the beginning of next year. And that's what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we get a lot in Levi's campaigns. Obviously the throwback, but each campaign we've left a huge mark on the world. We've resolved something big, that change in the pantheon maybe, or like a country has collapsed, or whatever. There's a lot of things that come out of that. Organizations are created, that kind of stuff, and that's really satisfying. Like at the end of the day, that's I think one of the main things we want to shoot for. Now we got another redemption here from Joker again, putting those points to good use. So with games that have in-game scenarios such as World of Darkness, you much rather run the exact scenarios word by word or make an end-of-the-world event happening in the background of your game. Like I wanted it in Cyberpunk 2020, explaining the changes between the two settings.
So I think when he's talking about World of Darkness, he's talking about the actual...
the official
end.
Like Gehenna or...
Lips, Ragnarok, those sorts of end events. I guess the question is whether or not you intend to use those end events. But because you're quoting World of Darkness specifically, Joker, World of Darkness was the least end of them all, because it was like, here's a book that's very much the way I'm writing Horan Huttenberg. Like, here's a book with like 7 endings. Which one's the one your party is fit best for? So the genius of Gehenna and of Ragnarok was that they were written flexible. So you can pick whichever ending best ends your campaign that you use to get you to that point. I would say that that's the answer, is you write the ending that fits best to the campaign you've been running. Like
that, yes.
If an actual book form of Gehenna doesn't work for your players, then don't run Gehenna. Like end it in a way that's meaningful and just say it happened during Gehenna. You just take the parts you need to make it feel like Gehenna and leave the rest of it on the cutting room floor of the editor's room. Like, in my opinion, that's what you do.
Yeah, it has to do with your scope again, like we were talking about before.
Right.
So, like with the World of Darkness, that plot is running large through, just the viscera of the campaign, right? Whether or not you touch on it at all, it's baked into the cake. But if you're playing a game that has nothing to do with the occulty stuff and like the apocryphal things and super elders and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't make any sense for suddenly that to be the end of your campaign, right? So it really depends on how much of that you've already been tinkering with. Like if you set it up for those things to occur, definitely you want to end with that. And in that case, what you're talking about with the choose your own adventure ending, I hate that book was such a kick in the dick. But that was a kick in the dick to me because I had been such a lore hound that I'd been reading all the novels and everything. I was like, I want to know how this story ends, like the story I've been participating in up to this point.
Right.
And when I got a choose your own adventure ending, I went, so there's no end?
Now, well, okay. So to defend the book a little bit, and it's been a long time since I've flipped through it, but the way I felt about Gehenna was that it let you just pull the scope back as far as you wanted to. I didn't feel like they were alternate endings. I felt
they were definitely alternate endings.
Well, I felt a lot of them were like, these were endings that just determined how big you wanted your scope to be. I felt like the last one was like super big ending, and then there was like the smaller scope ending, and like the other one was literally like just inside of a church. Like everything going on in those other endings could be going on elsewhere in the world, but it didn't matter because everything you were doing was inside this church. So like to me, it was maybe more of a scope issue. Again, and this is where you decide what your scope's going to be. If you're telling a love story between two vampires over 1,000 years and Gehenna comes, that church is probably your best scenario. You can have those two characters stuck in there. You can tell the end of their love story to the background of the destruction and chaos of Gehenna. You don't need to worry about the names of what elders are running around or what their plots are, or stupid stars falling from the sky. Like everything is inside the building is all you need. And you can end your story there, even in the lens of Gehenna. And that was, in my opinion, the genius of that book. I understand why people like you who are lore hounds were mad. You wanted a definitive ending. But for me, when I read that book, I was like, this is what the end of Gehenna needs to be, because there's so many different levels of stories you could tell. One story was not going to fit them all.
Yeah, we'll get into why I was frustrated at a later time. But
whole another episode based just on that book for Jeff.
I don't remember it being about scoping in the way we're describing tonight. I remember there being distinct endings that were mutually exclusive for most of them. Like they all had
some details in there that made them that way. Like I said, I read through the book like one time, and it's been a long time ago. So my memory of it was a scope issue. But
yeah, I do think it has to do with what scope you're at and what you're trying to accomplish with your story.
Exactly.
Like you said, if it's a love story, it needs to be a love story ending. If it's a occult hunting, figuring out the signs, finding the puzzle, you get all the pieces together, things start to happen. Oh my God, we're here. The payoff has to be, and then the thing happens. You know, what do you do while the thing is happening that you've been working on? Okay, there's the story ending. Whereas if suddenly it's just like, oh yeah, well, I mean, there's a bunch of cool stuff happening over there, but you don't know any of it, and we're just going to fight this dude in the streets because, well, that's a thing. Who's this guy? Well, then that's going to be a bad ending. You know, so again, it's just about scoops of the same stuff that you've been using. You know,
agreed. Yeah, and I feel like that's where the werewolf book was different. Like the werewolf book, like when you're a werewolf, you're a member of essentially an army, and Ragnarok is the battle with the worm, and it's out there in the Umbra, and it's going to spill over into this world. And it doesn't matter if your story was small leading up to it. At some point, it has to tie in and escalate to the point that you are, because you can't just skip out on the war. You can't be a draft dodger. Like you got to go fight in Ragnarok at some level. Now, it doesn't have to be standing side by side with King Albrecht. You know, it doesn't have to involve major, huge NPCs, but at some level, that war has to come home, and you have to fight it there on your turf. Like it has to have that spill over into your story. Whereas I think Vampire maybe is a little different beast because it's such a personal war. You could leave it inside a church and not care what elder's destroying who out there in the world. Like,
well, I think Werewolf in particular had more clearly defined components, right? Yeah. Like the themes were just smack you right in the face. It's, you know, the earth is dying. Your species is dying out. You're the last of a few proud people who have already lost. You're just waiting to see how it ends. And I think if you have that, like your ending is going to feel that way no matter what, I think. So long as it's not like, I won the big fight. You know, like I think you almost have to lose that one for that one to feel right.
You do. No, I think you're absolutely correct. You do have to end it that way. if you're going to use those in-game scenarios for the World of Darkness in general, I think you absolutely have to have it where it ends.
Yeah, I think you have the maybe you have some kind of arc or element that is a personal win. You're like, oh, I got this in before the end, but you still end. Like, I think that metaphor has to still exist.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I've never ran a World of Darkness game exactly through multiple stages of the World of Darkness. I ran all of my games in a particular stage of the World of Darkness. So, like, if I ran a game during the Ragnarok, it took place during Ragnarok. Like, it didn't take place like through 3 other books and then ended up in Ragnarok. Like, that's not typically how I use the World of Darkness. But if you do, like I said, it's fine if you do that. Where if I told a story about Gehenna, it would take place in that Gehenna book. Like, it would be taking place up to and including that. Like, those last couple series of books would be like the setting. I would put it in with the Thin Bloods and everything else, right? Like, all that would be going on. I don't think I would tell a 2-year campaign and then in year 3 I would be like, and now we're in Gehenna. Like, I don't think I'd do that. But if you do that, it's fine. It's just I don't think it's how I would structure my stories.
It depends. Like, if it comes across like this is out of left field, like we were describing before, then I think it doesn't work. But if it's like how Babylon 5 did it, where there were distinct like changes of events that led to this like huge thing at the end, and then in retrospect you look at it and you go, oh yeah, all the pieces were there, I just didn't recognize them at the time. Then I think you can pull that off, even in a scenario where your story didn't feel like those sorts of concepts were core. In retrospect, though, they were, and then that works. Joker's got another question for us.
I like this question.
Yeah, how do you guys feel about games with no-win scenarios, like Call of Cthulhu? Do you believe in no-win scenarios as a proper ending or no? Well, I mean, I think we essentially answered that already. What's up, Rio Bravo?
Hey, Rio Bravo.
I mean, just in what we were talking about with Werewolf, I think in that case, yes, your ending is a loss. It is a no-win scenario, and that is the beauty of that scene. And I think if, like, the romanticism of a finale where death is not necessarily death, but like a loss, a finality of some sort is present, I think players and a storyteller can make that really satisfying. If it's done well.
I think that I think Malice Conspiracy there just nailed it. In a game like the World of Darkness, especially if you're playing sometimes even Werewolf, but most of the time if you're playing Vampire or if you're playing like Call of Cthulhu, the story won't end before your character ends because the mechanics of the game drive you to that fulfilling end. And that's where I say this about my D&D characters all the time. Write your character's end. Help with your GM write a good solid end to your character. If it becomes his epilogue because it doesn't happen to him before he gets to that point, so be it. It becomes his epilogue. He rides off into the sunset to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how he ends. Or you're going to have your end be rather unsatisfying. I don't prefer no-win situations. I would like to think that if my characters had just rolled well enough in Terror and Treefell, they could have won. Yeah, I like to believe that now they were up against some pretty substantial odds because of decisions they made, but they still had a chance at winning. I believe that what I'm putting the characters up against at the end of this week, they could win. Now, as I think VTech said earlier, you have to define win a little bit because they're on a suicide mission. So winning is suicide, but it's a suicide mission. So what does winning really look like? It's about that legacy again. So no-win scenarios, I think, will get frustrating to the players because then why are they there? If it's a no-win scenario, then there's no reason for them to be playing. You just write the end of it. You've already determined the climax. You've already determined the ending. So then just write it and say, here's how the game ended, guys. Your last combat was really the end scenario, and here's the epilogue. So to me, I don't like no win. I like slim chance. But that's about it, I guess.
Well, again, I think it has to do. We keep touching on these things, but scope. If the scope of your story is on the personal, like what do you accomplish before the end, then a no-win scenario works. You're going to lose this fight. Everyone knows you're going to lose this fight. Why are you there? Because it matters to you to be there for some reason. because there's something you need to do before you go out. You need to have that last, shout into the abyss before you go. Something along those lines where as a player, this is the moment. It's futile, but I'm going to go for it. It's like, I think with the werewolf thing, it's a specific example where that works. But in a game like Call of Cthulhu, the entire idea of it is that the world is ancient and it will go on forever, and you are a speck that doesn't fucking matter, and no one will even notice you were there to begin with. And so, if you're in that scenario where stuff is just going through and you come to a cataclysmic ending and you just get snuffed out and you never had a chance, that fits that particular game and setting. That feels right for that. So I think in that particular case, that works. If you're playing a game like a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game where you're the classic heroes and you're fighting the big bad guy and you're going in there, if that becomes a no-win scenario, that's a real problem. That's not cool. That won't play well. But I think there are certain structures that plays extremely well in, and in fact, maybe the only correct way to end it.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think that this mirrors very closely our conversation about character deaths.
Yeah,
just in general. I think that the way you approach your campaign's end is the same way you would approach a party wipe or a character death at any point in time during your campaign. You got to make sure that when these things happen, you don't really want it to be flukish.
Yeah,
I think we agree on that.
Yeah.
If it happens, it happens. Sometimes the dice are just not with you. But I would like to think that if you're using your dice properly, as I like to say, don't ask for dice rolls that don't matter, and don't put in encounters and combats that don't matter, you get rid of the fluke option pretty quickly. So then if that leaves you with only meaningful scenes and meaningful combats to a degree, then you're more likely to be able to pull off a character death or an end of a campaign where there's no happy ending. And still pull it off to where it's satisfying for the players because it wasn't flukish. It was because of their own choices and actions. And that gets me back to, I was saying, how I wrote the end of Terra and Treefell. I wrote 3 or 4 different ways they could end it. And and as I like to say, the easiest one is the most evil one.
Yeah. Well, and that's
the hardest one is the heroes one. And I knew I had a group of players and the characters that kind of wanted to be heroes. So they took the hardest path and they paid the price for it. And by the time it was done, they came out as villains. And they were perfectly okay with it because of the path they took to get to that point and all the failures they had along the way. They, in their attempt to become heroes, became villains. And you guys are a group of criminals who may become heroes by the time you're done, even if you don't live to see it.
Are we heroes?
But who knows?
I mean, we kind of destroyed the world, and then we're like, can we get a redo? Can we just... damn it. We rile ourselves out and all the actions? Okay.
Well, just saying.
Yeah. And I think that's an important aspect of it, too, what you're describing, is that the good should be the hard way out. Evil should be easy, because it should be tempting. Laziness is hella tempting.
Quick as the path to the dark side.
Yes. And that's important, I think.
Luke taking Vader's hand or the Emperor's hand is the easy way to end Star Wars. Him getting shot by lightning for several minutes till his dad comes around to saving him is the hard way. It's the hard ending.
Joker's asking, do we plan sequels after we finish our games, or rather finish the game and move on to another one? Do you leaving?
I think that's obvious.
Scenes? Yeah, for Dustin, he went into this saying he's going to be writing 3 stories in the same world, doing a thing. For our other group, with Levi, I don't know that it's an intentional sequel as much as we know that we will play more games and they will be in the same scene or setting.
Yeah, I don't consider them true sequels. They exist in the same world. I don't consider them true sequels because, with the exception of Fulcrum, because he took something specifically from the previous game and wrote it as his character background, it has tied more through lines from the last campaign to this one than what we had maybe in some of the previous campaigns. Because we are so disconnected from where we're at location wise. Those through lines are the only reason why they're still there is because of Fulcrum, I feel. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't feel like it would be a connected world at all. We've even kind of theorycrafted like whether we're even still in the same world. Like
Yeah.
we're not even positive that we are. I think we are, but so I guess with Levi's campaigns, I feel like they're individual stories that take place in the same world.
Yeah, the story has a
really-
beginning and an end, and then there's a new story that has its own life and its own beginning and end. And they just exist in the same universe. There are obviously things there that you could see and say like that's from the history of this and that.
Right.
But yeah, I wouldn't say that's a true sequel in the sense that I think you're referring to, Joker.
I think it's very much in the same vein that like you could when you watch the first Guardians of the Galaxy, you're like, yeah, it's in the MCU, but it is not a sequel to Iron Man. Like it does not directly come out of Iron Man. Like it's its own thing. And eventually down the road, you find out how it ties back in. And I feel like that's maybe a more jarring example, but nonetheless, it's still how I feel like those things are. Me, though, I do write sequels to my games a lot of times. Raining Bullets did not have a sequel. Not until I got done. And then I started writing the sequel game to it after that because the events at the end of Raining Bullets inspired me to write another one. And then it never saw the light of day. Terra and Treefell, though, I knew ahead of time, like most of the way through Terra and Treefell, I was going to do an additional game. And you could tell because of the map I made. So when that map first appears in the first episode, like that map was intentionally made where Treefell's there, Huttenberg's here, Valandria's there. And that was the path of the 3 chapters that I was going to write. And I knew that way ahead of time. I didn't exactly know what they were all going to be. And some of those things have developed over the course of running those games. And to a degree, even rerunning them with my off-stream group has helped me hone in kind of on what some of those things are going to be. So, yeah, I have. I don't know if Jeff's ever done that, to be honest, at all.
No. Trying to think. I'm racking my brain if I have. I know I haven't. I like my own stories, each one
Fresh,
to be
clean
its own
slate
thing.
each time.
Yeah, because I think it can get a little stale to retread the same territory unless you purposely left things unresolved in a certain way. Like if you left pieces to pick back up and carry into the next one, and I tend not to do that. Like I like to play the whole hand right then and there.
I was gonna say I don't remember a time where you've ever done that in the games that I played and that you ran.
Yeah.
And this is really the first time I've done it. Like I said, I did write a sequel to Raining Bullets, but we never played it. So this is really the first time I've done that with Horde and Huttenberg.
Earlier, VTech was saying that's when we were talking about encouraging PCs to write their own death. He was saying that's something he needs to get better at, getting PCs to be a bit more involved in building a potential ending to their character and story. Not 100% what is going to happen, but get them thinking about what would be a good conclusion. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing because in Zweihander, the game we're playing right now, there is a thing that at the beginning is just a randomly generated dooming. That's what the word is. Dooming.
What it's called, a dooming.
It's like, this is how you're going to go out. And it's just like some random phrase. Like mine was, you won't see it coming, or like...
You won't see the end.
You won't see the end. Okay.
You won't see the end is your dooming.
It could be a lot of things. I don't know what that's going to be, but we're going to steer towards that a little, apparently. Could be I lose my other eye. It could be that I just cark it before the end happens. It could be that the thing that kills me is just something I don't see. There's a lot of things it could be. But I think it is an interesting element to kind of come into it. For me, like when I think of character deaths, and this we talked about a lot in a previous episode, but for each of my characters, I always have kind of a central concept that is a point of philosophy, a question, there's an emotion attached to it, and there's a process to go through. And for me, whatever my ending of that character is, the same as an ending of a story, I want it to be those things. I want it to be the natural conclusion of those elements. And, if I get killed by a random dice roll, I don't get that. But if I get killed by a thing who represented some element of that, that's still okay. Like, that works for me. Or if I make a choice based on those internal ideas that is consistent with that theme, that feels good. There are certain things like that. So, like, really, as a player, you just need to really sit down and think about what you're trying to accomplish with your character beyond just show up and throw some dice if you're interested in getting into RP and thinking about these sorts of things. I guess if that stuff's interesting to you, it's super interesting to me. So I feel like that's a very important element for me.
I think that my early characters, I didn't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
When I played my paladins in Crystal Falls, like went through the entire Forgotten Realms campaign with Joe, like I never worried about what his end game would look like.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Zen's story I kind of wrote after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Like after I took his adventures and I put them in more of a story format, I kind of created a narrative around a lot of what was otherwise kind of random stories that I played through. I think LARP is what changed a lot of that for me. And I know we've talked about how LARP changed us as players. One of the things I took away from LARP, and this could be just a part of Vampire in general, but LARP in general, because it's not your story, unless you make it your story. Mm-hmm. The STs are not there to tell your story. The STs are there to arbitrate your story, and you have to tell it, or someone else will tell it for you. Yeah. And that is very much the way that LARP runs. It is a PvP game, not just in a combat resources management, fighting over resources system. It is PvP in its storytelling. You either tell your story, or someone else will tell the story at your expense.
Right.
And that is something you have to understand at LARP. And so I think LARP had trained me over the course of like 5-6 years of LARPing and running LARP, that when I tried to get new players in and impress upon them was write the end of your story, write the end goal that you're pushing towards, and then everything else that happens in this campaign, just make it the next chapter. And every time something comes up, say to yourself, how is this event going to push me towards that end? And I find myself doing that even with my 5e character, Bowrin.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of an idea of what Bowrin's end game is. I have for a long time. But every time a new set of events takes place, the event with Skeezer, the things going on with Kodo, the going into the weird magic realm with Morgaine, Fulcrum stuff, like all those things slowly push Bowrin little towards this end game goal that I have in mind for him. Mm-hmm. So, it doesn't matter that those stories really aren't about Bowrin.
Right.
My goal is how is every chapter of everyone else's story that's getting explored push my character closer to his end goal? How do I make it part of my story? And that
how does it reveal something about Bowrin?
How does it reveal something about you? Like, Kodo got on Bowrin. He's like, well, you don't ever say anything about any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, he does. He is saying more things now because more things are happening. Mm-hmm. So as these things happen, you do get to see more and more of him as it goes along. It's just a slow burn because I'm pacing it over 100 sessions. I ain't talking about it in the first 10 sessions and having 90 sessions of nothing left to say. Mm-hmm. So, it's very much an intentional part of the way I'm playing the characters for the long haul. I'm a marathon runner through this thing, not a sprinter. Mm-hmm. So but again, the point is that I've still developed though this idea of who he will be at level 20, who he'll be at the end, and every chapter that comes along, the short arcs as Levi puts them together sometimes, then becomes the next chapter of my story. And that's something I learned from LARP. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I would pass along then to viewers is figure out what that end of your character can look like. And it doesn't have to mean his death. Like we talk a little bit about death. It doesn't have to mean death. It's just the end for your character. And the end could be riding off into the sunset.
Could be, yeah.
But where's he going?
Yeah.
What's his epilogue then at that point? Like what does his life look like at the end of his adventuring days? Yep. Is he a god? Is he a hero? Is he a villain? Is he dead? There's your options, right? Like figure out what you are. If you're playing World of Darkness and you're a vampire, odds are good. You probably go into some blaze of glory, into frenzy. You lose your humanity. That's your end goal. And that's what I always, impressed upon the players at LARP was figure out as you lose each humanity, how that's the next chapter of your character as you lose those dots in humanity. And so, I guess that's kind of what I do.
Yep. VTAC's got a question for us here that I think is going to be important. So VTAC is saying that their game started with he has never played D&D with their three friends that had also never played. So early on, it's all experimental. Now that they have become experienced over a year, do we have any advice for them to start to introduce some more RP heavy elements to tell a story together outside of the mission objectives, beating bad guys and getting loot? Well, I think some of there's just like a natural kind of progression, I think, as gamers of what motivates you, right? So like when you first come in, you're learning the systems, you're having fun with powers, you're excited about treasure, you're excited about beating things. When you play decades, you've done a lot of that, and you start to realize that there are other things that are more interesting to you as an individual, or maybe those things stayed as the most important, but for me, they didn't. And you'll stumble into scenes where suddenly there is something that is more interesting and more beneficial to your time that happens other than the success at the table in terms of dice and gold pieces and whatnot. And so like for advice, I would say the early things that help is speak in character. Make a distinction between my character and me. Refer to people by their character's name or refer to them as themselves. Don't say, I do X, Y, or Z. Say, my character does blah, 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 right? Unless you're using their voice, in which time you say, I did blah, 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 right? And I think that creates enough of a distinction between you and your character that you're freer to explore things without feeling like a failure is your failure. It becomes that character's failure. And that's okay. And at times it's good, right? And I think for encouraging stories and stuff, you don't have to start big, but as a DM, you have a lot of impact in this. Like when you describe a scene and you have an NPC interacting with the players, do you say, "Oh, he tells you a story about there's a dog and a guy, and the guy cares about the dog, and at the end of it, it's about playing fetch." Or do you go through and you tell the story embodying the guy and say it all out and listen to the impact that has on the players, what they say, and change as you kind of go. When you do that sort of thing, you're going to create a stage for the players where they know that they're encouraged to come out and try something. Try a voice, try something simple like, "Oh, I'm motivated by X, Y, or Z." It doesn't have to be big. It's just a little thing that they think about. Like I think 5e is doing a nice thing where they explain out like your flaws and your personality types, your ideals and your bonds. If that's used correctly, I think that gives a good first taste of how to do RP without having to write like a complicated backstory or have everything figured out. But it really is just start by example. Just lead by example. But Dustin, you may have some other things I haven't stumbled on.
I think you've nailed it. I think the first thing to do is to get into the headspace of your character and do that through the merits, flaws, ideals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing 5e, if you're playing like a World of Darkness game, you got your nature demeanor. Mm-hmm. Your character concept. When you develop that concept, you get into the headspace. Those are the devices in these various games that you have to put you in the headspace of who your character is. Mm-hmm. If you're doing something like Zweihander, some of that's randomly rolled. And mm-hmm. as Daniel said, your character's like a mosaic. And then you have to kind of make sense out of that mosaic of like, who are they? What have they gone through? You look mm-hmm. at those things and it helps you flesh out a little bit of idea of who my character is prior to sitting down for the first game session. Mm-hmm. I think after that, what you have to do is you have to then, if you're going to have them tell those stories, you have to start before game session 1. And you don't have to have them write backgrounds, but you at least have to have session 0. I think you have to have session 0, and you have to have at least a little bit of preliminary talks. Because if all you do is come into session 1 with what you as a GM or DM have put down on pen and paper, mm-hmm. then they don't have any roots, character-wise, in the story from the get-go. And by session 3, 4, 5, you're trying to develop those roots artificially into your mm-hmm. story, and maybe with some success, maybe not. And maybe that's not terribly bad if you're doing 100 games of Everstorm. It's not going to work if you're doing 13 games of Horror in Huttenberg. You gotta come in with a little bit of a group dynamic. You gotta come in with a little bit of, this is what my character is doing in this world. Some of those random roles help Jeff decide that Wolfram was a journalist who gave up high society. Like those were things that were kind of inflicted upon him. And then he made a narrative out of it that has run through the game and is now going to have some effects at the end. So, and that gives him a through line inside of the through lines and the world that I created. So I think that you got to have those things put in. I think that some of it will be a matter of, like Jeff said, getting voice acting, not even full on good voice acting, but just a voice for your character that's not your normal everyday voice. Something, a bit of inflection to it, word choices, those things that when we do our voices episodes that we talk about, go back, watch those, figure out how to incorporate any of that for your players, and get into that headspace, and you'll probably see through lines for those characters start to develop, and just pay attention to what they say.
Yep. And there's a lot of stuff we're gonna keep talking about here because I think it's an important thing. But there is an episode or two, I think, in our early on episodes that I linked to YouTube. You can go back and check them out. Some of them are about character voices. Some of them are about backstories. Some of them are about how to encourage role playing. So like specifically the question you have. And then of course, like we don't answer everything in there. So like we're going to keep talking here, but there's some valuable information in there for you. For me, like VTAC is saying, without basically saying, hey guys, let's do some more in character kind of RPing, what can the DM do to lay out those opportunities or encouragement? Like every party, each player has a certain comfort level with RPing versus tactical play. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same as like if you're at a party, right, in real life. Not party as in D&D, but like an actual like house party or something. There's always some people that are super gregarious, they're at the center of attention, they're active, they're serving drinks, they're in the middle of everything. And then there's always the people that are wallflowers. And so some people are going to be like that at the table too. Some people are never going to come out of their shell. They're comfortable in a certain way. They're having a good time. So long as they're having a good time and everyone else is able to have a good time, that's fine. But what you can do is to make a space for them to join in on whatever you're doing. And I think it's kind of what we were touching on a second ago. So rather than say, come on guys, let's role play. That's why I'm saying just role play as a DM. And if you have anyone do any of the things, you just really go into it. You encourage it by making that a rewarding experience. And other people will pick up on that cue. We're social beings. We understand, dynamics at play there. And if you start seeing that somebody's having a great time by doing something that is weird or new for you, you're going to pick it up and start doing it. So yeah, a lot of leading by example.
Leading by example is a good way of putting it, but I think it's more reinforcing the behavior you want will get you more of that behavior. You could do a little bit like Malice Conspiracy says, like punishing things like table talk. Like I'm fine with those kind of ideas. I don't get too heavy-handed with it myself. In particular, if it's new players at a table where someone's just trying to help a new player understand an X's and O's part of the game or something to that extent. Like, no, this would be common knowledge in our world that werewolves are hurt by silver. So you just would know that. Like, there's a certain amount of that you just have to kind of edge out what's too much. And if you just inform your players, if you have a regular group and you just inform your players, like you probably won't have a problem with that. They'll pick up pretty quickly where all the boundaries are. And then you can be a little more heavy-handed in places where they're intentionally trying to get away with things they shouldn't be, or doing it overcoaching. Like those things you definitely don't want to happen either. Right. So, because you don't want to take agency away from anyone, and you don't want another player specifically to take agency away from another player either. So that's why I'm not like against what Malice is saying. It's just you have to be able to discern the differences between those. And if you, like you just said, you create a space where you reinforce the good behaviors you want and you reward the good behaviors, you'll get more of those things back. Yeah,
I don't think you have to punish the X's and O's or non-role-playing behavior. In fact, I would steer clear of that personally, because I would rather RP have a good taste in everyone's mouth because it is only extra. It's more good. This is never like a bad choice if you don't, and a good thing if you do. So like Malice's other idea here is to role play a skill first and then get a bonus on the roll. So like if you say, I'm just going to do use diplomacy and roll against this person, it's just a normal straight up roll. If you do a scene and you say what your character says and it's really compelling and everything, maybe you get a bonus. Maybe you get
Right.
2 rolls,
Yeah.
maybe you get a +3, maybe something. The difficulty.
And
class
that's
goes up.
actually putting in an actual mechanic to role play at that point. And
Yep.
there's a lot of systems out there that already incorporate that into them. So if you want to encourage, switch a system that already incorporates that. Now you're just playing rules as written, and it's going to be a system that's going to help you encourage that role play. Like Exalted does a great job of that.
Another way to do it, kind of touching on Exalted, one of the things we liked was the end of the game had a ritual of going around the table and saying, okay, what did you learn? What did we find out about this character? How did the scene interact with you? Did you do anything that was particularly in line with the character you've laid out? And by just talking through it, you reinforce it. Like, I feel like everyone started thinking about it more. I think everybody was more inclined to focus on what they could do next time to be more in character. And in that one, like, you got like a bonus XP. Like in the Exalted, I think it was like you got a flat amount, and then you could get extra if you did X, Y, and Z.
World of Darkness has that incorporated too. Right? You get 3 per game, and then 1 for recap, 1 for give an extra XP if you're in those kind of systems. Let the players decide who gets the extra XP for the game based on some of that stuff. Make it a player rewarding player, not the GM rewarding, and let them figure that out themselves too. So like, and you say Shadowrun does the same thing, right? Gives you extra XP for that sort of stuff. So if you're going to incorporate a reward like that into it, especially XP based, like, let those players decide who's getting it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to consider is really look at what's happening at your table. So like another in-game ritual would be kind of looking at what the players really jumped to. Like, what did they think was really fucking cool? Like, what was the scene that happened? What were they doing in that scene that made that really fucking cool? If everyone's motivated simply by rolling dice, it may be just like, oh, we had that like super low chance and I rolled the crit success and it just went awesome. Okay, well, great. Your table's having a good time doing that. Maybe they don't like role playing. Maybe that's something they don't want to do. So keep leaning into the strengths of the table and what they want. Alternatively, though, if you find that the people you thought were already X's and O's only types, suddenly they're talking about, oh, it was really cool when the character over there, the thief guy, he's really greedy. So like, instead of just sticking with the party, he went to the other room to go swipe something, and that like put us in a weird spot. And then you had to figure out what to do about that. Okay, now that's cool. You put yourself in a bad position. You put your team in a bad position, but because of that, we know a lot about your character now, and it made the scene more interesting. And you start seeing that, and the players start recognizing that failure or complications become more entertaining than just pure success. That starts to breed a lot of roleplay. And I think that's it. Just emphasize what is exciting about the outcomes of roleplaying.
There's a maturing process, and I don't care what age your players are. But when you're new, it's all about success, victory, and power, almost predominantly when you first get started. And then they'll hit that point where they realize they can go the other direction. It's all about going out in places of glory and failures at every turn. And then they'll finally kind of hone in on balance. Regulate a little bit. They'll hone in on how to moderate those, when to have good successes, when to have a good failure. Because you'll see people kind of go the other direction and they'll over instigate. And so I think just let your players have that ability to find that medium for them and where they're going to ultimately land. And some people don't end at true north. Some people always skew a little to one side or the other. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just them figuring out who they are as players and who they are as role players and how they are tactically. They figure out where they end up on that grid.
Yeah, and I think some of it is finding what's flawed about your character. Because I think early on, most people are thinking, how can I be the best at blah, blah, blah? How can I be the most heroic? How can I be the best thief? How can I win every fight? But then once you start to think of what is deficient in this guy, not just the score, maybe my intelligence is low, but like, what does that translate to? Like, how does that make this person interesting? Like, what is it about that that's going to change how a scene progresses in a way that will be compelling? Once you have like a couple of those moments, that character starts to feel real. And then you start to enjoy that. So like, I'm trying to think back, like some of the characters I played, like Dustin ran a game, it was like a summer camp game. And I played this kid that was like no self-esteem, super, shy, anxious. He was scared of everything. And he was pretty useless most of the time because of it. But it was really interesting. And that wasn't, the typical character you play in a World of Darkness game, right? Like, or in a vampire game or something along those lines. And he had to like overcome some of those components of his character to have some successes, to pull off certain scenes. And there was real tension there because that character wasn't known for those strengths. He was playing against his strength almost. And I think that's a way to do it. That's maybe a little bit more advanced, I guess, if you're talking about people who are just now starting to roleplay, or maybe don't roleplay at all and you're wanting to start at step one. I think it's, pick a flaw. What is something you don't like about your character? Like, if you met your character, what would you not like about him? Okay, write that down.
And just know that not everything has to devolve out of that flaw.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You don't have to completely, like, Mr. Magoo it. Like, you don't have to be like a complete idiot savant the whole time or whatever. Like, you can have characters who function perfectly well in combat or in certain skill challenges and still be a bit of a dunce or naive or whatever other flaw you want to take, and they can still perform just as fine in these other aspects of the game. Like, not everything has to tie back to your character's a moron or your character is weak. Like, not everything has to go back to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn. And it certainly took us a long time. And I don't know, again, we've talked about this a lot. I don't know if it's because we were young and then we became adults and then that maturity occurred in our gameplay. We don't know if it's because of the Larp experience and how different that was from a typical game and the lessons we learned from that translating into learning roleplay. It could be a lot of things, but I feel like the biggest hurdle is feeling like you're doing something weird. Like you're embarrassed by acting at the table. And once you get past that, you're good to go, right? Like, and so like I think it's just a setting a tone, a culture around your table that makes that space available and makes it okay. Maybe one of the best ways to do it as a DM is just to do something that's kind of goofy and semi-embarrassing. Like play a character that is, you got to make weird faces and stuff that are just super goofy, and they look goofy. Because then everyone at the table is like, okay, well, somebody's already doing that. Like, so if I just have an expression that's semi a little strange, it's okay. And I think that'll like open them up a little bit. And then, like I said, just talk about what's cool.
I think start with something no stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't start with something super heavy for your RP, like in the game itself, story wise itself. Like if your games start at taverns, like feel free to give them some time to just sit and just play in that tavern, play darts, cards, drink, whatever. Keep it light. Have a food fight, whatever. Like something that just there's no stakes. It doesn't matter if they win or lose the rolls, but it's just pure about who those characters are and figuring out who they are inside those initial scenes, and then boom, then they get man with dark clothing and a large hat walks in, and the whole bar stops throwing potatoes at each other and turns and looks, and it's some duke or something who has a mission for the five of you, like, and then you can launch it from that scene into something a little more heavy. Like I don't know if I would, if you had people you're trying to encourage to do this, necessarily launch directly into something super heavy without giving them a little chance to just get comfortable and play first.
Yep. And I think that's a big part of it. As a DM, I think a lot of us, hey, Diesel Shot, welcome.
Diesel Shot, raiding with the Party 6. Welcome to the
Party
show.
6. We are talking about a number of things. We've been talking about how to end a story. We've also been talking about how to end a character story. And right now we're talking, we had some questions about how to encourage role-playing out of a group who is just learning the game, both as a new DM and with new players as well. And so one of the things I think is really important, again, is, I keep saying it, but leave space for them to perform, right? So like it's really common for DMs when they're setting up, they have so many things they have to get out, and they feel like they are responsible for the player's enjoyment, that everything is sitting on their shoulders. Every second that is silent is a problem, and they want to fill every moment with something. And if you are that DM or GM or storyteller, you have just sucked the oxygen out of the room. So they're just going to clam up, and they're just going to wait until it's their turn to roll the dice. But if you leave a big space open, or if you directly engage somebody, you look them in the eyes and you say, okay, so-and-so is talking to you, and they're asking you, and then you go into your voice and you're talking to them, people are just automatically are going to talk back, because that's what humans do. We talk to each other. And as soon as you get in that mindset of like, okay, this person is talking to me, it's my turn, like I have to respond, it's not that person's turn, they're going to engage. And so as a DM, just kind of spread that around. And then once there are ideas seeded out there, once there's, you can tell that somebody is thinking something or they got a feeling about something, shut up. Just go silent. The players will feel that uncomfortable silence, and they will fill it.
Yep. And then you get to talk again when they go silent.
Yep.
And let them get out what they're going to do. Let them back and forth between each other. And when that has a 3 to 4 second pause, that's your cue as DM to step back in and to then take back the reins, narrate the scene out, whatever you got to do to bring it to an end. I would say the last thing you can do, and this is something I just had as a kind of a thought, because it's so foreign to me, because we've been playing for so long, this was not available. But I think there's something to be said for what Critical Role has done for 5e. And you do not have to pick Critical Role. But you have the ability, VTAC, to take your players, sit down and watch episodes of whatever group you want to emulate, in the way that so many people try to emulate Critical Role and do things the way they do. Find any Twitch channel, any Yahoo channel, or YouTube channel, or whatever you got out there, and be like, this is what we want to aspire to, or what I want to aspire to for my game as players. Like, could you get into something cool like this? Watch some episodes with them over something. If they start liking, I didn't mean Yahoo, I meant YouTube Mouse. But I corrected myself after I said it. But I'm just saying, like, you get out there and you can watch these stream games. I don't care if it's Critical Role. I don't care if it's someone on the tabletop, channel here, if it's us, whoever. And you're like, this is what I want our game to be more like. I want to push to do more voices the way these guys do, or I want to incorporate minis and maps the way these guys do, and show your players. You can show them what the end goal can look like, and give them an idea of creating a roadmap to help get there.
Mouse just giving you shit. Do you have free minutes on AOL? I think there are more examples at play now than ever before, and that is a huge advantage, like Dustin's saying. It doesn't necessarily also have to be that either. You can also look at what type of media do these people like? What characters do they like in pop culture? Why? What is it about those that is compelling to them? Maybe just have that conversation once. Like, what made this a good movie? What made that one not a good movie? Okay. Well, now I know something about you, about what's going to drive you in a story. And if you start to kind of just do that, get enough information about your players, about yourself as a storyteller or a DM, and start to just kind of tie those together, and then just leave the opportunities there, it's going to happen. It'll eventually occur. And I think you're right. I think maybe
a while to get good, but it'll happen.
Yeah, one of the things we did at Larp, or at least one of the things we tried to do or talked about doing, was having a night where people would get together and we would watch a series or a show or a movie or something that captured the essence of the LARP setting that we were in, the World of Darkness. So like, conspiratorial toned or, political, like intrigue, that kind of stuff. And we just sat down and watched it, and we're like, why is this fucking cool? Well, X, Y, and Z. And, oh, did you think about this other thing? No. Okay, well, why is that character cool? Oh, they did this and this and this. And then you get your example right then and there. And everyone's on, picking up the same kind of influences. And whether that's, again, from pop culture, from like a critical role or something like that, you learn a lot about each other, and you learn a lot about what's going to work at your table.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, it's something we didn't have, so we developed outside of something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that anyone who was at the right age who watched the first Matrix, it immediately spun what every Mage the Ascension game was ever going to be from time on after that.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you watched Lord of the Rings, it inspired what many of your 5e games was going to look like after that, whether you read it or watched it. So, I think there is media out there, and I think that can help you figure out what your game world may feel like.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when it comes to just purely on a role play end to get players engaged with the idea of doing it and what it can look like, I don't think there's anything better you could do than find a stream game where there's good role play and just be like, this is what it can look like. Because that's what we did at Larp. We took new players in. What we did is we introduced them to a person who role played real well and said, you run around with him for the night and you see what they do. And then after a few game sessions of running with a couple of different really good role players, that player either realized they could role play or they quit. It was one of those two. Like most of the people who just weren't into it were just like, this is not for me, and we never saw them again. And that'll happen sometimes. People just won't be into it. But but the ones that were going to role play, like they picked up very quickly. Like this is how you take this game to another level. And if you want your game to be at another level, that's what you do. Is you give them a good example to go by. And if you don't know if you can be that example, find a good example of it out there and show them, and grow with your players to where you all get there.
Absolutely, and just remember, it's a long process. Because you're going to screw things up. You're going to forget what your character's voice is. You're going to say something dumb that you try to make sound cool. You'll probably go through the phase where you try to like pick your words super carefully and it sounds fucking weird. And you'll go through all this stuff. You'll change things about your characters. Your character's personality will change maybe from game to game until you lock in something that feels right. And just, give people the opportunity to go through that process without making it a big deal. Make sure it's not a big problem that you're, embarrassed about or, talking shit about or anything like that. Just go to the table, be decent to one another, give each other the space, and encourage one another. And it'll happen if people are interested in it, and it won't happen if they're not interested in it. Yeah.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of bring this thing back around here full tilt, Jeff.
Okay.
Sunday is the end of Horror in Huttenberg. You're one of my
sure
players.
Is. Yeah.
We're gonna play just a little fun game here at the end. I'm gonna ask you a question. While you answer, I'm gonna find something in my book real quick, and then I'll go it off while we do this. I gotta remember where I did that. I think it's in here. But so without having any knowledge, because you don't have any knowledge. What do you predict happens at the end of Horror in Huttenberg?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. And I can see why you're asking this. It is a good tool for a storyteller or DM or whatever, a judge or whatever they're called, to figure out where the players are and what they picked up in the story and all that kind of stuff. The way we left it in the last game, we'd kind of done what we've been doing the whole time. We've been positioning ourselves to be central, but not actually responsible for anything. And so in this case, we found ourselves trying to fix a problem that we didn't originally create, but we made way worse. And so our idea was to come back here and again, duck responsibility by going back in time and putting the responsibility squarely on somebody else's shoulders and saying, hey, it's your fault we fucked up because you fucked up. Now fix it. And what we got instead is smacked in the face about 6,000 times by time paradoxes and deformed and put in a position where the escape that we thought we had is not actually there. We thought we were just going to be able to just hang out for another year and we were going to be right back to where we were before with all the knowledge and everything being cool. And that's not what happened. So I think, just based on what was going on, if we managed to convince them to change their actions and they succeed, really we unwrite ourselves. And I mean, it sounds like there's probably going to be a side plot for us that we're dealing with while they're dealing with their thing. I have no idea what it's going to be. It's going to be some kind of complication. I would guess that there's going to be something that is trying to fix the timeline or smack us in the face for our actions, basically. We need a comeuppance. We need to be smacked on the knuckles. We have done it bad. So I think that's the thing that we're going into. I know my character is going to be leaving the pamphlet to himself with all the happenings of what occurred, what may have been the cause, what the devices were, how they were made, and just like a warning, like don't go down this track because you end up here. So I know that's going to be in my character's future. I don't know what that's going to be for the other characters necessarily.
Now, out of curiosity, what other plot lines do you think need some resolving at this point? Not necessarily your own, but just in general.
I mean, from my perspective, kind of going through it, I think it is a matter of seeing what comes as a result of us giving this other group a second chance, whether or not we are creating or causing a problem. But in terms of like the plot lines that were kind of already there, I think we've done a good job of running almost all of them into the ground and making them a fiery explosion. So I'm not sure how much of a loose thread there is necessarily. If we do what we're intending to do, I don't think that there are loose ends that I'm aware of. I think that they're all just kind of sutured up just by the actions. If we succeed. If we fail, there's a lot of loose ends and a lot of problems that go with that, and the world's pretty boned, and we're boned too. So I don't know. I don't know that I see necessarily a plot that's been left hanging that I could think of right now.
Interesting. Okay.
Now I know you feel differently.
I'm not confirming or denying anything. I'm just was curious from a player's perspective how you thought the events were going to go down this coming Sunday, because there's a couple of things that I've mentioned to you. Nothing plot wise, but just things that are important, because this is a very unique situation I'm in as a GM, having two very different casts show up to redo the end of one game by creating a new end for a second game. I did just think of one. Like one of the things I was kind of saying is that I have to make sure this feels like it's the end of your guys' game. Yep. The events of Terran Treefell are going to have a chance there at repeating, maybe with some slightly different endings than they had before. But I want to make sure this feels as though it's a culmination of your guys' story. So that's where I was curious what all you felt like needed to be represented in this final conflict of sorts in order for it to feel as though it's your guys' conflict.
I think our group, like I said, I think it's a crime and punishment facing responsibility. And we were all young characters doing bold and stupid things, flying by the seat of our pants. And I think that there is a maturity story there and a hard lesson of, oops, you screwed up. Now, the one loose thread that we do have is that the inventor of the time machine and the difference engine and these components and the body of the Emperor and stuff has seen us, already predicted we'd be there, already has plans, and so there's going to be a parallel thread there. So long as that individual is at play, the rest of the events can transpire. So I guess it depends on what happens as a result of us interacting, with him. And whether...
Are you talking about Bravo?
Okay. Yeah. So it's a question of, did we... it doesn't sound like we motivated the actions of his plot by this point of interaction, but it seems like that had to have occurred. And it has to still be that way for the rest of everything to be possible. So, just because of time travel paradoxy stuff, I think it has to be there. But there are some questions of, did we motivate anything? Are we in some unknown way responsible for another component of this plot that we're not aware of at this time, and what will happen as a result of him interacting with us.
Now, this is the only spoiler I will give you for this week and for Vigilantes of Valandria. I'm giving one spoiler away because it's unavoidable, and it's the only thing that I'm truly railroading.
Okay.
The player Woda of Hagen cannot be there for the last game.
Okay.
So his character will completely repeat the actions that he took at the end of Terror and Treefell. I will not deviate from that course with him, so he will flee.
Mm-hmm.
He is, by profession, a jester / vigilante.
Yeah.
When he fled from Treefell the first time, and this shows you how far in advance I write my stories for these games when I was plotting them out. When the characters who fled from the temple at the end of Terror and Treefell fled, and when the characters who died in the temple died, I started off with Horan Huttenberg deciding which of those player characters would appear and in what ways in Horan Huttenberg. I decided that Plague Dr. Pathos would be brought back and buried, that Plague Dr. Latronius would go into hiding as his true identity, so he would basically hide in plain sight, and that Plague Dr. Pathos would be, because no one knew of Plague Dr. Pathos, that Nadia, Plague Dr. Pathos, would be believed to be Plague Dr. Latronius and would be buried as a hero. So that is the initial plot line that kind of kicks things off. I decided that Hagen, Woda's character, as a vigilante and as a jester, would go back to Valandria where he came from. He would not just return to Huttenberg. So while many of the PCs that lived did return to Huttenberg, I decided that Hagen would go back to Valandria, to the capital city where he came from, and his character will be instrumental then in creating what is the Vigilantes of Valandria story that's going to take place in the third act. So he is intentionally meant to survive the ordeal, and that events that take place in this coming game he will witness. And those things will directly shape what the world looks like in Vigilantes of Valandria because of him. So he will ultimately be the observer, if you will.
Sure.
That a lot of the things that go on then will shape him as the observer that will lead into Vigilantes of Valandria. As he becomes the, as I like to jokingly call him, the Batman of Valandria at that point. So this is like the falling into the cave scene. This is the watching his parents get murdered scene that inspires him to become the vigilante that takes on what will be the third cast party. Their characters will be vigilantes, then the Robins, as I like to jokingly call them, underneath him at the start of Vigilantes of Valandria.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, I don't know that there are really any other glaring examples of things that we need resolved, though. Because clearly we had Ravit running away from any interaction with her father.
Right.
And that's in a future that is no longer in our arc. Let's see. Really, I mean, everyone else is pretty much just bandit, criminal, going about, criminal lifestyle. And so being kind of a vagabond, like getting up and moving and dropping everything is pretty par for the course. And we obviously said, screw it, we're done with that timeline. So I think at that point we already said, yeah, we're done with anything that was left there. I'm trying to think if there's really anything else, because, yeah, it's just a matter of really, I think, just saying, can we pull this off? And if we don't, then we don't. And if we do, we do. And if we do, we don't know what that leads to, but it's probably not good.
So as you've probably seen, I have these books that I do my writing in, and there's one for each of my games. This is the book for Terror and Treefell. And about this far into it, near the end, if you will, is the original character concept design for Bravo von Helfrich that I drew up.
It's not quite
and
focusing.
The initial... What?
It didn't focus quite there.
It didn't focus?
I don't know if you can see it or not, but
Yeah, pull it back just a touch. Okay, well, it's close enough.
he's gone through some changes, but the interesting part is this takes place in the Terran Treefell book, because that's where I started writing Horn Huttenberg. The Horn Huttenberg book does not contain those things in there at all of him. So it's just been interesting. Like I said, if you want to know, if you ask how early I start writing my sequels, they often appear, the first chapter often appears in the previous games book. Mm-hmm. So just as a little, like I said, a little example of how I work as a GM and as a writer. Like that's how it goes. So you can expect to see at the end of this book some notes written for Vigilantes of Valandria, and then I will get a third book that I'll keep my notes in there, because every time I rerun those games with my off-stream groups and stuff, I continue to write notes in those books. So
yeah, looking back at old notes is always interesting. Like I found some of mine for the old Exalted game a couple years back, and like, you know, there's stuff you remember, and then there's the other stuff you just completely have forgotten, and you go back through and you're like, some of this stuff was really bad. There's a reason I forgot it. And then other parts, you're like, God, that's a gem. I can't believe I forgot that. And then you get to go down memory lane and really enjoy it. Yeah, old ideas that never came to be. Yeah, there is a lot of that too. Like, I remember, you know, plotting out scenes and stuff, and then you get to the table and it just goes somewhere completely different. And you're like, well, what are my notes saying here? Because they don't line up at all with this other part. Oh, yeah, right. I had to ad lib here. It's fun seeing how like stories kind of devolve and then re-evolve into something better. You know, like, and if you follow those notes, hopefully you're good at taking notes. You can relive it a little bit when you kind of go back. It's nice.
Indeed. I certainly enjoy flipping back through my book there, and I see like my little notes that I've jotted down, like, and like I said, I'm planning on getting these. I hate to use the word published, but I am turning these into adventures for the Zweihander community, and down the road, I may even be rerunning them, you know, over on their channel, or you might see them ran on a couple other channels. I know Chuck from Defenders of Cobalt, one of our fellow players in Horn Huttenberg, he's interested in running Terra and Treefell with his group. So, you know, I might put together a quick outline and feed him notes between game sessions and see how Chuck does it with his group. And it'll come out very different, because he's a very different GM than I am. So there's
no way in hell that you'll get this Horn Huttenberg scenario.
Oh, no, Their group is way different set of bonkers than our group. So
I don't even know how we ended up here, but just ping-ponging off things, I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, we are at that time we normally would have wrapped up about.
We're actually a little over time tonight.
Yeah.
So
any other questions lingering out there? Yeah, we always go late when it's just us.
We always go late when it's just the two of us. So
we just yap about. So, are there any outstanding questions? They don't necessarily have to be good questions, but, you know, just haven't been answered. I know we had some early questions that we didn't get to at the very start.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll tell you this much. You're going to be hella surprised come Sunday.
Good.
Based off your answers. There's a lot more layers to this thing going on than what you're anticipating. So
good.
And for those of you out there who want to help with those, Wednesday night, 10 p.m., Under the Influence, I'll be working on them. I've already done probably 90% of the legwork. I've already done the maps. I've already imported all the character sheets. I've already done all the stuff that I got to do. A lot of it. But there is a few things left. And we'll definitely be working on those on Wednesday.
Very cool.
And I'll be taking a lot of viewer input. So if you've been a fan of the show, if you've been watching the episodes on YouTube, you've been watching them live, you come in, you got some good ideas, I'll probably honor them.
Some of you are responsible for the horrible things that have happened to my character.
That was Malice and Chris Derps, I think. Were the ones that were there that day.
Damn canine skull face now. Caught me on fire.
Right.
That was a beautiful dwarf. But yeah, so we have that to look forward to. Well, I'm not seeing any questions popping in there, so maybe we just got everything layered out there pretty well. So let's see. Oh, Malice, yeah, you would never negatively impact another character. Pfft, yeah, never, not you.
Let's believe.
Well, in that case, we've started kind of talking about what we're doing through the week. So let's go ahead and continue. Next week, we are here 10 p.m. as always with the Wisdom Check. Who's our guest next week?
I believe next week we have a returning guest. It's going to be Turkey from the Grouch Couch. He's going to come back. We're going to talk about all the things that have been going on over there in the last year, which is a lot.
Hell of a lot. Oh, yeah.
Hell of a lot. And,
that'll be a fun one.
That'll be a fun... He was real early in his DMing career when he was on here last time. In fact, I think he was still just a player in the very first season of Drunks and Dragons. And so he's DM'd like 4 campaigns since then. And so it'll be
quite a few.
Really, really cool talking to him now, having gotten to be a player in new systems and everything else that he's done since then. We're going to have some really cool, fun times with Turkey Terror next week. So tune in next week to hear about the Grouch Couch and what's going on over there.
Fantastic. And VTech, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. We like bringing good content to you, and I'm glad we're providing it. Always love having a consistent fan.
I just hope one of these days you defeat the world. You've been VTech versus the world for as long as we've known you, and I just hope someday,
one day,
you win that fight.
So that brings us to Tuesday. So my phone is starting to do weird things. So Tuesday, hey, thanks for the bits, Mouse. Tuesday is Cam's day. He does a couple different shows. So Cam, I believe, is probably going to be sticking with making music tomorrow because he's been working on music for our All Flesh Must Be Eaten game called Don't Sleep. But he's also got another show where he does workout stuff. So he's got bardic knowledge and he's got barbell knowledge. So it could be either one of those. I don't know which one's going to be, but it's a good time. That's 8 p.m. Central Standard Time here. So go keep him company. Enjoy that. Wednesday, Dustin already said, is going to be Under the Influence. So get in there. 10 p.m. Make sure that things go crazy for us, because I'm sure you will.
Bring your channel points.
Oh,
because Wednesday, you can spend channel points to help me make some decisions and to get to do some rolls for stuff. But come Sunday, I'm turning the channel points off.
Oh, shit.
The finale is bits only.
Bits only?
The finale is bits only. And there's 2 fortune pools. One pool for the Terror and Treefo cast, one for the Huttenberg cast. And the rules of fortune, misfortune might just change.
Oh, shit. Oh, so when they spend... Oh, I see where you might be going with this. Okay.
You didn't even know there was alternate fortune rules, did you?
No.
There are now.
Fantastic.
So, just one of the many surprises you may get for next week's finale.
Malice just got a new badge. 1,000 bits donated. Congratulations.
Oh, nice. Thank you, Malice. That's awesome.
So then on Thursday night, it's a video game night. So typically we play a number of different games. We've been playing 7 Days to Die. We've been playing Vermintide 2. There's talk about possibly playing, what's it called? Baldur's Gate 3. I've been playing Phantasmaphobia. And I've been thinking about adding, if I do play it again, adding a ability for you guys to make the jump scare noise in my ear for bits. We'll see what happens. That game's all about like tension and being scared, so I think that'll be a thing. Potentially those games, if nobody wants to play, then I'll probably do a single player thing of either the Phantasmaphobia, or I might play some Stellaris. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Go into our Discord and tell me which of those 2 games you would prefer. There's a video game section there, and we'll have that in our back pocket just in case the guys aren't available. But otherwise, we'll probably find a team game where we can get together and have a good time. And see, Friday, we're off on Fridays. Right. When is our next Everstorm game? That's not too far.
It's still another week out. It's still at least another week out. I want to say it's 2 weeks out, actually. Okay. I think it's like the 14th or something. 9th. I don't know.
We'll have to check that.
What's the weekends in November? Because it's in November.
Yeah.
I think it's the 14th. I could be wrong. Nope, maybe the 7th.
It'll be soon. It's really soon. So be on the Discord. Find out when it's going to be, because it's going to be good stuff. We're dealing with dragons, man. It's going to be a lot of good times. So come by, check out the 5th edition Everstorm game that we got. And like I said, then we got Dustin's big boy.
5 p.m. Central Time Sunday. It's Chapter 9, No Tomorrows. And it is the end of Horror in Huttenberg. It's going to be a double cast.
Mhm.
10 players.
It's a lot of
Five,
players.
5 out of the 6 from Terra and Treefell, minus the player of Hagen Woda, as we said, he can't make it back. It's going to be the 5 cast members from Horror and Huttenberg. The map has grown. There's all sorts of chaos left to ensue that at least this player has not conceived of.
Nope.
And we still got a GM prep session on Wednesday to add even more chaos to it. So
Yeah, we'll see what comes. It's going to be
so
great.
Tune in next Sunday as I try to bring this train wreck to an end.
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah. And so that gets us around to one of the last things here. We got a YouTube channel. We are extremely close to getting our goal of 200
3.
subscribers.
Just
It's
3.
somewhere in there. So if you're
Maybe.
not a sub on there, go sub, because when we hit 200 subs, we are going to give away a Pathfinder 2nd edition book to one lucky person in the chat. So make that happen. That's going to be awesome. And then the other last thing we got is The Art of David Lee Pancake. So put a bunch of links there for you. He's got a store, he's got Patreon, he's got Twitch, he's got YouTube. And what you're going to find there are some really awesome sculptures, predominantly dragon related. So if you're into really detailed sculpts of really cool stuff, that's your place. You want to go there, go show him some support, give him some love while we are in these COVID days and he can't sell things at conventions. So much appreciated if you would do so. Anything else you can think of, Dustin?
We covered the YouTube. We covered your dad's art.
Mm-hmm.
I say at this point, we're ready to maybe find a raid.
Fantastic. Excellent. I see Quest and Chaos is on.
Yep, I saw that too. There was one other I was looking at. I got to see if they're still on or not. Yep, we're going to go say hi to our friends over at TPK Roleplay.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Are they still on? It says they're live, but their stream didn't come up when I clicked on it.
This is our favorite part of the night. Trying to find
Oh.
somebody to raid that doesn't go offline the second we join them. While he's doing that, thank you to the audience. We much appreciate you all.
Buddy.
Yep. Much appreciate you guys and gals and everyone else. You make it a lot more enjoyable for us with all your questions, giving us something to bounce off of. And, if we didn't get to your questions, you have things you'd like to discuss more, definitely check out the Discord and talk to us there, or, pose us some questions and we'll try to get to them in the future. Until then, looks like we're going over to Quest and Chaos.
We are. It looks like TPK Roleplay wrapped up just too soon for us, but Quest and Chaos is still on and running, so we're going to go say hi to them. So tell them TT2KB sent you, and we'll see you all next week.
Fantastic. Adios.